Hey guys, this is Star What If. How are you all? Please support to subscribe this channel for watching new interesting stories. So in this video, we will see what if Harry Potter uncovered the darkest secrets of magic and defied fate. Here is short summary. Harry Potter uncovers forbidden magic, unearths hidden truths, and takes control of his own destiny, reshaping the wizarding world forever. But before we start, if you want more stuff like this, then be sure to subscribe and like this video. And if possible, share this video with your friends. Now let's start the story. After lunch on the first day of classes, Hermione suggested, "Harry, why don't we go to see Madame Pomfrey right now? We still have 50 minutes until the beginning of Charms." Harry hesitantly agreed, glad that Hermione accompanied him. Madame Pomfrey listened patiently to his explanations, before she made him lie down on a bed, waving her wand over him several times. Finally, she took a small parchment, scribbled something, and handed it Hermione. "Please show this to the teachers of your afternoon classes, Ms. Granger. Mr. Potter is excused from class, since this check will take quite a while." "Is he all right?" Hermione asked in concern, seeing that the healer's face had taken on a stern expression. "I hope so," Pomfrey replied, turning back to Harry. She continued to wave her wand at the boy, headed back to her office to search for something in a huge book, and finally called Dumbledore. "Albus, can you please stay with Mr. Potter for a short while? I have to flow to St. Mungo's and bring one of the cardiologists with me, since I only know so much in that area. I suspect that he was hit by a dark spell, which caused him to get cardiac trouble." The headmaster threw her a terrified look, before he agreed, taking a seat next to Harry's bed. "Since when did you have these problems, Harry?" he asked gently. "Since the beginning of the holidays," Harry replied in an even voice, trying to hide his anger against the headmaster. He still hadn't forgotten that the man, after ignoring him for a whole school year, had chosen the night after Sirius' death to tell him about the prophecy. "You don't have to sit with me, Professor. I've been alone over more than 2 months. I'll well survive a few hours." Noticing that Harry's voice was laced with bitterness, Dumbledore sighed. "I know that you're angry with me, my boy, but please try to overcome that feeling. It's important that we work together. By the way, you need to finally learn occlumency this year. Do you want me to teach you, or shall I ask Professor Snape to try teaching you once more?" "Professor Snape, please, sir," Harry replied, instinctively knowing that he didn't want to work together with the headmaster several times a week. "Very well, my boy. Additionally, I want to teach you something and would like you to come to my office for that purpose. I'll notify you when I'm ready." Finally, Madame Pomfrey returned with an older healer in tow, introducing him as Healer Jones from St. Mungo's. The healer waved his wand at Harry a few times, before he accompanied Pomfrey into her office for 5 minutes. Harry could see that she escorted the man to the fireplace, before she returned to his bedside. "Healer Jones shared my opinion that you're suffering from a cardiac insufficiency, which has probably been induced by a dark spell. Unfortunately, there is no counter spell or anything else we can do about it. There are potions, which I can give you when you feel bad, but in general you have to be careful not to do anything strenuous. From today onwards, you're exempt from the Defense Against the Dark Arts class, and you must not participate in any duels, friendly or not. You're only allowed to fly after seeing me within an hour beforehand. It might happen that you feel too tired to attend classes. In that case, please come to me, and I'll excuse you with your teachers." Pomfrey threw the headmaster a questioning look. "That's all I can think of at the moment, but it might be that there will be more activities, which you have to refrain from." Harry looked horrified at the adults. "How am I supposed to kill Voldemort when I'm not even able to fight?" he thought, terrified. Dumbledore nervously stroked his white beard. "Poppy, is it safe enough for Harry to remain in his dormitory, or should he stay with one of the teachers, so that he can be constantly monitored?" Pomfrey sighed, before she replied thoughtfully, "Frankly speaking, I have to watch him for a while to be sure about that. Well, considering that the Gryffindor common room is on the 7th floor, while the entrances to the teachers' quarters are on the same level as the hospital wing, it might be better if he stayed with someone. We'll think about it. Mr. Potter, for the time being, you may remain in your dormitory, but I want you to come to me every evening between dinner and curfew for a short checkup." "All right," Harry replied wearily, too shocked to prevent his thoughts from going haywire. "I knew that I was sick, but I didn't think that it was so bad," he mused. "There's no way that I'll be able to become an Auror." The realization struck him hard. "I'll speak with Severus," Dumbledore told Pomfrey. "He'd be the best to take Harry in and look after him." "No," Harry replied angrily, noticing that his breathing became labored as he threw the headmaster a menacing glare. "Mr. Potter, don't make yourself so upset please," Pomfrey scolded him lightly. "For now, you may go, but I want to see you once more tonight." Harry thanked the Medowitch and angrily left the room, ignoring the headmaster completely. "Placing me with Snape," he mused angrily, while he slowly walked back to his common room, knowing that the last afternoon class had already begun. "Well, I already realized last year that the headmaster doesn't care about me at all. He only cares about me as much as the prophecy is involved. I'm nothing more than a marionette to him." When he entered the empty common room, he made a decision, about which he had already thought intensely over the holidays. Making himself comfortable on the sofa in front of the fireplace, Harry took parchment and a quill out of his school bag and began to write a letter. "Hello Tom. No, I'm not trying to insult you, but I'm not aware of any other name for you, which we'd both approve. As Dumbledore explained to me, there is a prophecy about you and me. Now, what I'd like to ask you is the following: do you really believe in prophecies? In fact, I don't, especially if Professor Trelawney makes them. She's an absolute fraud. Well, frankly speaking, I've no intention to kill you. Why should I? Just because she says so? Or because Dumbledore believes it? No, thank you. What do you think? I'm looking forward to your reply. Yours sincerely, Harry." Finishing his letter, Harry slowly walked up to the Ollery and handed it to one of the school owls, apologizing profusely to Hedwig. "I'm sorry, but I'm too worried about you to send you on such an errand," he softly whispered into her ear. He remained in the Ollery, sitting on the floor with Hedwig on his arms, gently stroking her head feathers, until it was time to head down to the Great Hall for dinner. "Harry, what did Madame Pomfrey find out?" Hermione queried as soon as he took the seat his friends had reserved for him in their middle. "I'll tell you after dinner when we're alone," Harry promised absent-mindedly, before he continued to ponder about the question how Voldemort would reply to his letter. It wouldn't take Harry long to find out. At breakfast the next morning, a black vulture made its way to the Gryffindor table, landing right in front of Harry with a completely black parchment attached to its foot. Unbeknownst to Harry, at the head table, Snape told Dumbledore, "That's the Dark Lord's vulture," pointing over to the Gryffindor table, where Harry was just taking the parchment from the bird. Dumbledore jumped up from his seat, shouting, "Don't touch it, Harry. It's from Voldemort." Harry decided to ignore the headmaster and proceeded to take the letter from the vulture, glad that nothing happened, when Hermione all of a sudden slapped his hand away, shouting hysterically, "Harry, did you hear what the headmaster said? It's from Voldemort." However, this didn't go well with the vulture, who bit the annoying girl on the hand, causing her to cry out in pain. "Oh no, come on, Hermione, let me take you to the hospital wing," Harry said firmly, grabbing her arm with one and the letter with the other hand, pulling her out of the Great Hall, before the headmaster could reach him and try to take the letter from him. Harry made Hermione sit down on a bed, glad that Madame Pomfrey hurried to the girl to look after her bleeding hand, and quickly excused himself to the washroom, knowing that the headmaster would surely be on his way to follow him to get a look at the letter from Tom. "To the insulting scar-head that lives to annoy me. Thanks for your letter. That was a very interesting theory indeed. We'll have to think about the matter. When I went to Hogwarts, the aunt of your Trelawney was teaching divination, and she was really good. At the moment, I don't intend to kill you, because my nose is running. Malfoy and Lestrange were supposed to help me get better, but they are cowards and fled, because they didn't want to get sick too. Are you good at potions? Maybe you could ask Professor Snape to teach you brew a potion for me or come and bring me one. I know that he hates you, but if you tell him that you're my pen friend, he'll surely help you. Try to annoy the old fool as well as you can. Lord Voldemort." As soon as Harry had reached the last word, the letter vanished into thin air, and Harry hurried back to Hermione, seeing that Madame Pomfrey was just wrapping her hand into gauze and told her to come back to see her in the evening. The headmaster was standing behind the Meadowitch, turning immediately to Harry when he joined them. "Harry, give me the letter. It might be dangerous," he demanded firmly. "Oh, I don't have it anymore. It ended in smoke as soon as I read it," Harry said, feigning confusion. "Did it contain a message?" Dumbledore queried, nervously stroking his beard. "No, only insults," Harry replied, shrugging, before he left the room together with Hermione. "Oh no, Harry, we're late. Transfiguration is going to commence in 2 minutes," Hermione said, terrified after a glance at her wristwatch. "Then we have to hurry," Harry replied, running up the stairs together with his best friend. Only when they stopped dead in their tracks right in front of the Transfiguration classroom, seeing that the doors were already closed, Hermione noticed that Harry had problems breathing and remembered horrified that he wasn't supposed to run. "Harry, are you all right?" she asked in concern, giving him a piercing look. "I'll be fine," Harry breathed. "Let's go in, before we'll be even later." Hermione knocked at the door, and they entered the classroom, taking the seats Ron had reserved for them in the first row. "I'm sorry, Professor, we were at the hospital wing until now," Hermione quickly apologized. Her head of house gave her an acknowledging nod, before she exasperatedly shook her head at Harry, who cringed under McGonagall's disapproving look. All his efforts to make the professor forget about the matter by flawlessly managing all the transfiguration tasks vanished into thin air, when McGonagall asked Harry to stay back after the class. "But Professor, he'll be late then for his next class again, and we have potions." Hermione tried to convince her to let Harry go, but the teacher stayed adamant. "I'll give Mr. Potter a pass." "Don't worry, Ms. Granger," McGonagall replied in her stern voice, motioning Harry to follow her into her office, where she made him sit down next to her desk. "Harry, you know that you are not allowed to run. You have to be careful," she said insistently. "I'm sorry, Professor, I forgot," Harry admitted in a small voice, feeling slightly annoyed by the professor's concern. "I know that everyone is worried because of the prophecy, but frankly speaking, I don't believe in prophecies," he blurted out, clasping his hand over his mouth in shock after realizing what he just said. The professor's expression slowly softened. "Harry, do you know me as someone who believes in prophecies?" "No," Harry had to admit. McGonagall sighed. "Harry, the problem is that even if I don't believe in them, Professor Dumbledore and Voldemort do, and therefore, I have to be concerned about your safety. The same goes for your heart problems. I'm not concerned because I believe that you have to vanquish Voldemort, but because I'm worried about you. You're Lily's child, and she was always like a daughter to me. I don't want to lose you, Harry. Please be careful." "Voldemort doesn't necessarily believe in the prophecy," Harry blurted out. "I asked him. Well, I wrote a letter to him. That's why he sent me a reply. I trust you that you don't tell the headmaster about this. He told me that at the moment he doesn't intend to kill me, because he has a cold and no pepper-up potion." When he hesitantly looked up, Harry noticed that the edges of the professor's mouth slightly pulled upwards. "You want to try to solve the problem on a peaceful way, knowing that you're not able to fight?" Harry nodded, smiling at his head of house. "Harry, if you need help or advice, don't hesitate to come and ask me. I'll help you, and I promise that I won't tell anyone," McGonagall replied warmly. "Now, there is still something else we have to speak about, but I'm afraid that we don't have time now. Since you won't be able to become an Auror, considering your heart problems, we have to think of something else, which we should do urgently in case you need to take different classes. Now it's still early enough to change. Can you come here again tonight after dinner?" "Of course, Professor, thank you," Harry replied, gratefully taking the parchment that McGonagall gave him for Professor Snape. His head of house's warning that he had to go slowly even if he was very late still in his mind, he slowly trailed down to the dungeons, holding McGonagall's parchment under Snape's nose, before the teacher could even take points for his tardiness. "You have to pair up with Mr. Malfoy, Potter," Snape sneered, and Harry sat down on the empty spot next to Draco Malfoy, who ordered him to prepare the ingredients, so that he could brew the potion. Not eager to fight with the boy, Harry did as he was told, glad that their potion turned out flawlessly, although he was very absent-minded. pondering if he should speak to Snape about Tom's letter and his need of pepper-up potion. Well, he seems to be in a not-too-bad mood today, Harry mused and hesitantly approached the teacher as the class ended, telling his friends to go ahead since he knew that Ron always wanted to get to the Great Hall for lunch as fast as possible. "Professor, I received a letter from your other master," he hesitantly told Snape, who threw him a menacing glare. "Where is the letter? Hand it over," the potions master demanded, holding out a hand. "It vanished as soon as I read it," Harry admitted in a small voice. "You stupid boy, didn't you think what harm the letter could do to you? You should have let the headmaster check on it first." "He told me that he needs a potion for his cold," Harry replied, unable to hide a small chuckle, causing the teacher to frown and extend a slender hand to Harry's forehead. "I'm not delirious, sir," Harry told him in utter annoyance. "Let me see. I told you already, I don't have the letter anymore, sir." Harry began to tap his foot on the floor, slowly getting impatient. "I know what you told me, Potter. I want to see the memory," Snape hissed and pulled his wand. "Legilimens." The teacher watched how Harry read Tom's letter, pulling out of Harry's mind immediately afterwards. "I wondered why he wrote to you instead of just summoning me, but he can't summon me without Malfoy or someone else with him," Snape mused aloud, smirking, before his voice became stern. "Potter, did you write him a letter?" he asked, surprised. "Well, I merely inquired if he believed in prophecies and told him that I don't believe in them," Harry replied in a small voice, causing the teacher to raise an eyebrow at him. "You wrote to the Dark Lord to ask such a question?" he queried, unbelievingly. "Yes, sir." Could you please, not tell the headmaster about it, sir?" Harry asked pleadingly, unable to understand why he was just talking about the matter with his most hated professor. Snape sighed. "Potter, what did you intend to do, writing to the Dark Lord?" Harry let out a deep sigh. "You probably heard that I'm not able to fight anymore, sir. Well, I thought that if we both didn't believe in the prophecy, maybe we wouldn't have to fight at all. But the Dark Lord obviously believes in it. Why else would he have gone after your parents? But that was a long time ago, and perhaps I'll be able to convince him not to believe," Harry replied quietly. "Mr. Potter, I'd like to continue this conversation at a different time. We'll both be missed at lunch. We also have to fix a time for our occlumency lessons. Can you come here tomorrow evening right after dinner?" "Okay, sir," Harry agreed. "Professor, what are you going to do about the potion?" "All right, the pepper-up," Snape remembered. "Potter, do you intend to write back to the Dark Lord?" Seeing Harry nod, he summoned a small file from his office, handing it to Harry. "Then you can send him this. Give him my regards, and tell him to stay in bed." The thought, this would be a brilliant chance to poison him, penetrated Harry's mind, while he pocketed the file and slowly followed the professor to the Great Hall, surprised that Snape kept a moderate enough pace for Harry to keep up with him. "Harry, what happened?" Hermione queried in concern, when Harry showed up a few minutes before lunch ended. "What did Snape do to you?" Ron questioned, throwing an angry glare after the man, who quickened his pace as he strode over to the head table. "Nothing happened. I had to speak with him about something," Harry replied impatiently. "Now let me eat a few bites, and I'll tell you tonight, all right?" "Of course, Harry," Hermione said softly, gently helping him to a glass full of pumpkin juice. The last afternoon class was defense against the dark arts, so that Harry had a free period. "Well, I have to write my letter to Tom," he mused as he climbed up the stairs to the common room, which was fortunately empty at that time of the day. For a few minutes, he pondered what to write, before he set to work. "Hi Tom. Here is a phial of pepper-up potion, which Professor Snape gave me for you. I'm supposed to send you his regards and to instruct you to remain in bed. By the way, do you know what happens to people who fall through the veil? As you probably know, your horrible bitch of a friend Lestrange kicked my godfather through the veil. Are you aware of a possibility to bring people back who are behind the veil? I'd appreciate your help in this matter, especially as I don't believe that you instructed her to kill my godfather. Before I forget, at that time, you were looking for the prophecy, weren't you? Dumbledore showed it, or at least his memory, to me afterwards, and I think it is complete bullshit. It says that we have to kill each other, because none of us can live while the other is around. But we're both fairly alive, aren't we? I told Professors McGonagall and Snape about our conversation, and they both said they'd appreciate it if we stopped fighting about such a stupid thing. We won't tell the headmaster though, since he is too obsessed with you. He nearly received a heart attack when your vulture arrived this morning. Could you perhaps instruct your bird to give me your letter in private instead of at breakfast the next time to ensure some privacy, please? Looking forward to your answer. Harry, somehow feeling too tired to walk up to the owlery right now, Harry called Dobby and instructed the small elf to send his letter and the file to Tom with a normal school owl. You was writing to the bad man. Who is wanting to kill you, Master Harry? Dobby asked incredulously. Harry quickly explained what he was trying to do, and the house elf's expression brightened visibly. Very good, Master Harry. I wills brings your letter and file to the owlery immediately. With a deep sigh, Harry lay down on the sofa, craving the warmth of the fireplace when Ron and Hermione were the first to come through the portrait hole. Harry, are you going to sleep? Hermione asked worriedly. We have to do our homework. Oh right, Harry remembered, sitting up immediately. I have to hurry up, because I've to go and see McGonagall after dinner. Since I won't be able to become an Auror, she wants to advise me what other options I have, he added, seeing that his friends were watching him questioningly. Ah, that's good, Hermione replied in relief. Did you already think about it, Harry? Harry sighed, slightly exasperated. No, my own, when should I? Until yesterday I wanted to become an Auror. Anyway, we have to do our transfiguration homework, he decided, taking his quill back in his hand. 2 hours later, Harry entered his head of house's office for the second time that day. The professor offered him a seat and a ginger nut, which he didn't want to refuse, and threw him a warm smile. Harry, I know that this is all very sudden, she began in a gentle voice, but did you by chance already think of something you'd like to do after school? Harry shook his head. No, Professor. That was really unexpected. All right, Harry, but don't worry. You'll find something else. There are other possibilities, like for example becoming a healer or a teacher. Personally, I'd appreciate it if you either remained at Hogwarts or worked at St. Mungo's or the Ministry in order to have medical help nearby in case you needed it. That might sound too overprotective, but... I know what you mean, Professor, Harry interrupted his head of house. You're probably right. However, the problem is that I don't know if I'd even be able to become a healer, since I don't have any know-how or practice in that area. I know that I like teaching from my experiences with the DA last year, but since I won't be able to teach defense against the dark arts, which is my best subject, I've no idea what else I could teach. I was much better in defense than in anything else. McGonagall looked at a parchment on her table. You're not bad in transfiguration and charms either, Harry. If you intended to remain at Hogwarts, we'd have to consider which posts would be open in 2 years' time though. One position, which we can make available at any time, is that of the History of Magic professor, since we can ask Professor Binns to retire at any time. Professor Flitwick told me that he considers retiring in a few years' time, and since Professor Dumbledore will also want to withdraw during the next few years, so that I'll have to take his position, transfiguration will be vacant in the near future as well. I know that you're not brilliant at potions so far, but I assume that it's merely a result of your unfortunate relationship with Professor Snape, since your mother was very good at potions. Anyway, Professor Snape is in need of an assistant, and if you could manage to get along well enough with him to fill that position, you'd at least be able to remain at Hogwarts until one of the positions you could take over becomes vacant. Harry was too stunned to reply. He merely threw the teacher a grateful look. You could also ask Madame Pomfrey to teach you a bit, so that you can see if you were interested in healing, the professor continued. That's a good idea. I have to go and see her now anyway, Harry said thoughtfully, glancing at his wristwatch. Well, try to do your best in charms, transfiguration, potions, and history of magic, Harry. You could also take healing as another newt class, provided that Madame Pomfrey will be willing to teach you. With that, Harry was released and pensively wandered down to the hospital wing for his checkup. Of course I can teach you healing as additional newt class. We don't offer it as a normal class, so that the students can concentrate on the subjects that are more important to the majority of them. The question is when you have time, Pomfrey said thoughtfully. Do you have your timetable with you? We could do it while your classmates have defense, because for me it would be the best when everyone else is still in class. Today in the last period was defense. I'm sorry, Madame Pomfrey, I have to look it up, Harry replied, unable to hide a big yawn. Harry, I'm going to keep you here for the night. You're already exhausted, and I don't want you to climb all the stairs up to the tower, the Medowitch said softly. No, Madame Pomfrey. I haven't finished my potions homework yet, and we have potions first thing in the morning, Harry protested weakly. I don't care if you've finished your homework, Harry. Your health is much more important, and I'll tell Professor Snape as much, Pomfrey replied firmly, waving her wand at the boy. An instant later, Harry found himself dressed in hospital pajamas and grudgingly lay down again. Thank God I don't have to walk back all the way, he couldn't help thinking though, before he drifted off to sleep within seconds. He was so sound asleep that he didn't hear Professors McGonagall, Snape, and Dumbledore enter the room and watch him sleep in concern, before they sat down in Pomfrey's office for a meeting. However, Harry was torn from sleep by the noise of something attempting to break the window next to his bed. He quickly reached for his glasses, but it was so dark outside the window that he couldn't see anything but the heavily falling rain. Harry slowly got up and hesitantly made his way to the window. When he slowly opened the window just a little bit, Voldemort's vulture hopped onto the window sill, holding out a black letter for Harry. Thank you for bringing it here and not to the Great Hall, Harry said softly, while he carefully took the letter. I'm sorry that I don't have anything I could give you here though. The vulture made an indignant sound, before he took off through the still open window, while Harry returned to his bed and lit the tip of his wand to read his letter. Potty boy, thanks for the more than annoying potion. It helped and I'm back to my evil self. Give my regards and my gratitude to the potion's master. Concerning your godfather, I know how to get him back and I'd be able to help you, however, my assistance has its price. Now you'll wonder what that might be, and I'll leave you to it, because I need to work on the matter for about a week. As soon as I'm ready I'll contact you again. I trust that Beelzebub, my vulture, found you alone this time. The Dark Lord Harry looked at the letter in confusion, turning the parchment around to see if there was anything else written on it. Strange, he mused. What does he want me to do? Plus, why doesn't the parchment vanish into air as usual? A glance at his watch showed Harry that it was only 5 o'clock in the morning. Knowing that he had at least an hour until Madame Pomfrey would show up, Harry called Dobby, instructing the elf to fetch his school bag for him, so that he could finish his potions homework, before he had to head to his first morning class. Harry had nearly finished his essay an hour later when all of a sudden, the doors to the hospital wing opened with a bang, and the potions master strode into the room in a fast pace, causing Harry to hurriedly try to hide his parchments under his covers. However, the quick movement didn't go unnoticed by the professor's sharp eyes, and the man came right over to Harry. What do you have there? He queried, raising an eyebrow at the boy, while his right hand automatically positioned itself in an accepting position. Show me, the teacher snarled, seeing that Harry didn't react at all. Better to face Madame Pomfrey's wrath than Snape's, Harry finally decided and hesitantly pulled his potions homework from under his covers, handing it over to the professor, who eyed the parchments in disbelief. Mr. Potter, do you really believe I was going to take points from you for doing your potions homework? He drawled. No, but... Harry slowly trailed off, throwing a hesitant glance at Madame Pomfrey, who chose that exact moment to emerge from her office, heading over to them in concern. Obviously able to understand the problem, Snape pocketed the parchments and turned to the Medowitch. Good morning, Poppy. Good morning, Severus, she replied gently. Ah, I forgot to tell you that you must excuse Mr. Potter from his homework today. I kept him against his will and in spite of his begging to be released because of his due potions homework. Harry groaned inwardly, seeing the potions master smirk. No problem, Poppy. Mr. Potter will serve detention tonight in my office, so that he'll well be able to hand in his homework later today. Come to my office after dinner, Potter. With that, the teacher left the room. Why did he come here at all? Harry wondered, giving the Medowitch a confused look. May I go? He asked impatiently. Don't let yourself get so upset, Harry, the Medowitch admonished him lightly. You may leave in time for breakfast. I don't want you to walk up to the tower unnecessarily. Did Snape really assign me detention, or was that just an excuse, because he already told me yesterday that I should come to see him tonight? Harry pondered during all of his classes. After eating a few bites at the dinner table, Harry slowly dragged himself to the potions master's office. Half-heartedly expecting to find himself being placed in front of a pile of dirty cauldrons, Harry's eyes widened in surprise and confusion when the teacher motioned him to follow and strode ahead through a hidden door behind one of the bookshelves. Only when they reached a round room with a group of comfortable seats and sofas placed around a huge fireplace, Harry realized that the professor had brought him into his private quarters. The walls were covered with bookshelves, and Harry found the room very cozy. "It's much nicer than I'd have imagined Snape's personal quarters and very light, considering that we're in the dungeons," he mused, while he absent-mindedly followed the teacher's order to take a seat. "Mr. Potter, there are a few things I wish to speak with you about," the professor began. "Yesterday evening, Professor McGonagall, the headmaster, and I had a meeting with Madame Pomfrey, who wants you to be moved from your dormitory to stay with someone who is able to keep an eye on you. For an unknown reason, Professor Dumbledore chose me to become your temporary guardian. Therefore, you're going to live with me here in my quarters, at least for the time being." "I understand," Harry replied, unsure what to think of the matter. He wasn't very surprised, because he knew that the headmaster had been pondering this solution, but since the professor had been very kind during the last few days, the thought of living together with him seemed not so horrible anymore as it had been a few days ago. "I expect you to abide to my rules, which means that you'll be in our quarters by curfew at the latest. You'll do as I tell you, you'll not put yourself into danger, and you'll inform me if you encounter any problems with your studies or elsewise. You will also tell me if you feel sick, and you'll keep me updated concerning your conversation with the Dark Lord. Do you understand all of these points?" "Yes, sir. I received a letter from Tom early this morning," Harry explained slowly, pulled the parchment out of his robe pocket, and handed it to the teacher. Snape studied the letter, raising an eyebrow. "I wonder what he is planning," he commented thoughtfully. "Do you think it's a trap, sir?" Harry inquired worriedly. The professor pondered the question for a moment, before he replied, "Not necessarily, but it's important that you inform me, before you react to whatever he tells you." With that, Snape called Dobby and asked him to fetch Harry's luggage from his dormitory, before he led Harry into a small corridor, opening the second door on the left side, which led to a bedroom twice the size as Harry's room at the Dursleys'. The room was painted in a light blue, and Harry liked it immediately. "You have time until half an hour after curfew to get into bed. After that I will come and check on you, before the lights will be knocked out," Snape said firmly, causing Harry to let out a small sigh. "Mr. Potter, I'm aware of the fact that you'd rather prefer to stay up until the early morning gallivanting your common room, and believe me, I'm not thrilled of this situation either, but since my colleagues have decided that I'm responsible for your well-being, you'll do as I say without complaining. Do you understand me?" the teacher asked snidely, making Harry cringe at the cold tone. "Yes, of course, sir. I'm sorry, sir," Harry replied quickly, before he all of a sudden remembered something. Professor, will Beelzebub find me here? I told Tom not to send him to the Great Hall but to tell him to find me at a more private place." Snape smirked. "He will find you. If you continue through this corridor, you'll get to a door leading outside into a small garden. The door is equipped with an owl's flap, so that birds can get in and out. If you leave your door open, he'll come into your room." To Harry's disappointment, Beelzebub didn't appear during the next 10 days. Harry spent much time considering what it could be that Tom wanted him to do. In the meantime, he became used to living in Professor Snape's quarters, and as much as his friends pitied him about the matter, Harry noticed that he somehow enjoyed having an adult around, who acted like Harry imagined a parent would act towards a child. Since Harry behaved himself and obeyed to him, Snape found it much less annoying to have the brat live in his quarters than he had expected. Actually, he didn't mind the child make himself comfortable on the sofa doing his homework, while he sat in his favorite chair in front of the fireplace grading essays during the evenings. It was a nice change to always being alone. One morning, Harry felt extremely tired. "Thank God it's Friday," he mused while he dressed and got ready for school, before he dragged himself into the living room to meet Snape, because they normally walked up to the Great Hall together. "Harry, what's wrong?" the teacher inquired the instant Harry entered the room. "Good morning, sir. Nothing is wrong. I'm just a bit tired," Harry replied softly. The professor motioned him to lie down on the sofa for a moment, before he waved his wand at the child twice. "Harry, you're exhausted and are running a slight temperature. I don't know if it's just your normal problem or something else, but I want you to remain at home this morning. Try to sleep a bit more. I'll come and check on you again at lunchtime. What classes do you have today?" Transfiguration and potions, sir, Harry said, astonished. After a quick look at his watch, Snape stepped over to the fireplace and called McGonagall. Good morning, Minerva. Harry is not feeling well this morning, and I want him to stay in bed. He is going to miss your class, and please excuse both of us from breakfast. Harry couldn't hear what his head of house replied, but a minute later Snape stood up and called Dobby, asking him to bring breakfast for the two of them. After taking a few bites, Harry lay down again, falling asleep within seconds. He didn't even notice that his guardian draped a warm blanket over him and gently tucked him in. A few hours later, Harry woke up to Beelzebub impatiently nibbling his hand. He quickly took the letter from him, thanking the bird that hurried away immediately. Harry reached for his glasses, noticing that Snape had put them on the table, before he curiously unfolded the black parchment. To the most annoying brat still alive, in fact, there are 3 things I want you to do, while after your second task I'm going to help you free your godfather. At first, you shall assist me get rid of all my Death Eaters. I'll summon Professor Snape tomorrow evening. Report to him at 9 o'clock in the evening, and he'll bring you to me. Tell him that I expect you to accompany him in advance. I see you tomorrow. Lord Voldemort fiercely rubbing his forehead against an upcoming headache. Harry read the letter 5 times to see if there was anything between the lines, which he had missed, but he couldn't find anything. Remembering that Snape had instructed him to speak with him before reacting to anything, he tiredly laid the letter aside and lay back to sleep a bit more. When he woke up, Snape was sitting right next to him on the edge of the sofa, holding the letter in his hands. What does he mean, Professor? Harry inquired sleepily. He's not going to kill you, is he? Snape smirked at the boy, before he waved his wand at him, frowning. You're not feeling better, are you? Not really, Harry admitted in a small voice and asked hesitantly, could I perhaps have a headache potion? The professor nodded and headed into his lab, returning with a small goblet full of a light green potion. He patiently waited until Harry had sat up and pressed the goblet into his hands, watching as the boy sipped the liquid with a disgusted expression on his face. Thank you, Professor, Harry sighed in relief as he handed the goblet back. What are we going to do? Snape threw him a thoughtful look. First of all, you'll write back and tell him that you're not willing to enter his home. Suggest to him that the 3 of us meet in the small cave outside Hogsmeade. And what about the passage of getting rid of the Death Eaters? As much as I despise Malfoy, I don't want him to kill you, Harry replied in an upset voice. Then ask about the matter. I don't think that he intends to kill us though. Severus summoned parchment and a quill from his office, laying both on the table right in front of Harry. Harry took the quill and set to formulate a response. Hi Tom, thanks for your letter. I have a few questions though. First of all, I'm not willing to meet you at your home or some other place unknown to me. I suggest that we meet in the small cave near Hogsmeade. It's on the opposite side of Hogsmeade if you come from Hogwarts. Let's meet there at 3 o'clock in the afternoon or even earlier, so that Snape won't have to explain to the headmaster why he took me with him. During the day, we'll be in Hogsmeade anyway, so that nobody would notice. Secondly, what do you mean with getting rid of your Death Eaters? As much as I dislike them, I'm not going to kill anyone. Please reply quickly. Harry he set the quill aside, throwing Snape a questioning glance. Do you think that'll do, sir? Yes, I believe that he'll enlighten you a bit more now, the teacher replied, before he once more called Dobby to order lunch. Professor McGonagall knows about your letter exchange with the Dark Lord, doesn't she? Snape asked pensively, watching Harry push a carrot around his plate. Yes, but she only knows about the first letter though, sir. I didn't have a chance to speak with her after that. All right then, I'll ask her to keep you company over dinner tonight, since I have to show up in the Great Hall at least once a day. Then you can tell her everything. Perhaps you'll even have an answer from the Dark Lord until then. It's better to have one member of the Order know where we'll be in case we end up in a trap. I'm going to inform the headmaster that I'll take you to Hogsmeade tomorrow, provided that you're well enough to buy you some proper clothes, Snape added, smirking. After eating a few bites at dinner, Harry showed McGonagall the letters from Tom, causing her to frown. You're not going to endanger Professor Snape, Harry, are you? No, Professor. I wrote back and asked him to meet us in Hogsmeade in the afternoon and told him that I won't help him kill anyone, Harry replied, putting down his fork. All of a sudden, Beelzebub appeared, carrying a black letter again. Oh, thank you, Beelzebub. I was already waiting for Tom's reply, Harry said gently, taking off the parchment, and opened the letter, while the vulture found its way out of the dungeons. To the most annoying no, it all still alive to annoy me. Well, I forgot that little boys still have their bedtime. All right, we'll meet at 3 o'clock at the small cave. Of course you can't tell the old fool. He'd assume that I'm going to prepare your demise. Don't wet yourself. You won't have to kill anyone. I merely need your assistance with a spell, which has to be cast in Parseltongue. See you tomorrow, Lord Voldemort. Harry chuckled, handing the letter to McGonagall, who read through it and frowned. Harry, I don't like this at all. Thank God Professor Snape is going to be with you, but nevertheless I think it's dangerous. She remained thoughtful for a minute, before she continued. Harry, wait a few minutes, please. There is something I wanted to give you, and I think this is the right timing. I'll just return to my office and get it. Harry mumbled tiredly, making himself comfortable on the sofa again. A few minutes later, his head of house was back, sitting on the edge of the sofa. Harry, if you don't feel better in the morning, you have to write to Tom and postpone your meeting. You're in no condition to walk to Hogsmeade. I know, but I hope it'll be better tomorrow, Harry sighed, looking expectantly at the small thing she held in her hand. Harry, this is a ring, which belonged to your mother. When Professor Dumbledore brought it back from your old house, I took it with the intention to give it to you sometime. When you told me about your letter to Voldemort a few weeks ago, I charmed the ring for you. As soon as you put it on your finger, it will turn invisible to everyone except for you, and it is an undetectable portkey. When you activate it by touching it with any part of your body and say the password, which is Lily, it'll take you to the hospital wing here at Hogwarts. You can even take a person with you, if you both touch the ring, while you say the password. Thank you so much, Professor, Harry said in relief, eyeing the simple but beautiful ring in amazement, before he slid it over the ring finger of his left hand. You're welcome, Harry. I hope you won't need it, but I feel better knowing that you have it with you at all times, McGonagall replied softly. In the morning, Harry felt much better. However, considering that he had to meet Tom in the afternoon, he decided not to go to Hogsmeade right after breakfast like his friends did. Why don't we leave around lunchtime, so that you could meet your friends at the Three Broomsticks at 1 o'clock for lunch? That'd leave us enough time for a short trip to the clothes shop, before we have to head to the cave, Snape suggested thoughtfully. I'd rather not meet my friends, or at least not be alone with them. They know me so well that they would sense something isn't right, and they might follow me, but I don't want to put them into danger, Harry mused aloud. All right. In that case it might be better to eat lunch here and leave around 2 o'clock. We can still take the flow to the Three Broomsticks, the teacher decided, causing Harry to nod his agreement. I received your assignments from your other teachers, so that you could get a head start on your homework if you wanted. That's a good idea, Harry replied gratefully. Oh, by the way, thank you, sir, for saving me from Madame Pomfrey the other day, when you took my potions homework. You're welcome, Mr. Potter. I'll be in my potions lab. He pointed to a door behind Harry. Just give me a shout, if you need me. I'll leave the door open. The morning passed much too slow for Harry's liking, but finally, they left for Hogsmeade. After a short trip to the clothes shop, Snape led Harry away from the busy main street into a small side street, where he placed an invisibility charm on them, which still allowed them to see each other. He apparated them out of the town to a point not far from the cave, from where they could overlook the entrance. Just a safety precaution, Snape mumbled on Harry's questioning look. Let's watch the entrance for a while, before we head down. Nothing happened though, and 10 minutes before 3 o'clock the two wizards carefully made their way down to the cave. He must already be in the cave, Harry whispered, noticing that his scar began to hurt immensely. Snape gave him a piercing look, noticing that Harry's face was scrunched in pain, and pulled a small phial out of his robe pockets, which he handed the boy, before he cancelled the concealment charm. Thank you, sir, Harry said gratefully, handing the empty phial back. Let's go. Together they entered the cave, seeing that indeed Tom was already waiting for them. Hello Severus. Hello Harry. The red-eyed man greeted them, causing Snape to bow lightly. My lord, he replied. Harry grinned. Hello Tom. Thank you for coming. I need both of you to help me today, Tom began to explain. Severus, Harry and I are going to cast a spell in Parseltongue together, for which we need your arm. While Harry looked at the man expectantly, Snape raised an eyebrow in confusion. Thank God Harry informed Minerva where we are, he mused, while he slowly rolled up his sleeve. Excuse me, Tom, but what will be the effect of the spell? Harry wanted to know, causing Snape to inwardly sigh in relief. I'll tell you afterwards, but don't worry, it won't harm our precious potions master. Well, you might be in a bit of pain, Severus, but I trust you have a few files with you. Yes, my lord, Snape replied, inclining his head. Tom showed Harry a parchment with a long incantation, all written in Parseltongue. He grabbed Severus' left arm right where the dark mark was and instructed Harry to do the same and speak the incantation together with him. Seeing that Harry threw Severus an unsure look, Tom chuckled. Ah, Harry, are you afraid of what is going to happen? I want to abandon my Death Eaters. They're too annoying. I'm fed up with being the Dark Lord and have these dunderheads key asterisk my robes. Therefore, I want to take their marks off, but since there are several hundreds of people bearing my mark, I won't be able to get rid of them all at once. However, you and I together will have an enormous power. I understand, Harry replied, glancing at Snape, who gave him an unobtrusive nod. On 3, Tom commanded, and together they cast a strong enough spell to shock a huge part of the British magical world. By an immense amount of pain the Death Eaters' attention was drawn to their dark marks, which burned for 2 minutes, before they vanished completely, leaving miraculously white arms behind. Harry laid all the magic he could summon into the spell, before he watched in amazement how the mark cleared from his guardian's arm. Seeing that Snape seemed to be in agony and slowly feeling his own mind slip, Harry quickly asked, Tom, are you all right? Can we leave you on your own? Yes, I'm fine. I'll just apparate home, Tom replied in an exhausted voice, while Severus gulped down a pain-relieving potion and turned to Harry. However, Harry beat him to it, motioning the professor to touch his ring. When Severus complied, Harry mumbled, Lily, activating the portkey. Only when they landed safely in the hospital wing, he allowed himself to succumb to unconsciousness. What happened? Pomfrey inquired sternly, casting a diagnostic spell at Harry. He probably depleted his magic, Poppy. Please do what you can do for him, and then we'll return to my quarters. Albus can't know what happened. I'll tell you and Minerva later in my rooms. All right then, you may take him through the flow. He's fine otherwise and only asleep now, but he needs to remain in bed over the rest of the weekend, and he can't do any magic for a week. Shall I bring Minerva and join you after dinner, Severus? Yes please, Poppy, the professor sighed in relief. Wait a moment, Severus. What's wrong with you? The Medowitch asked, suddenly noticing the painful expression in the obsidian eyes. There's nothing you're able to do for me at the moment, but I'll be fine, Snape drawled, scooping Harry into his arms. I'll tell you tonight, he assured the Medowitch, who was eyeing him in concern. Back in their quarters, Severus laid Harry on the sofa and made himself comfortable in his favorite chair after gulping down the strongest pain-relieving potion he had in his stock, especially brewed for when he needed it after being summoned by the Dark Lord. He won't be able to summon me anymore, he mused, feeling partly relieved, while he couldn't help thinking, my time as a spy is over, and with that I'm worthless to Albus. Not even my current position as Harry's guardian is going to make me any worth, since he'll probably abandon Harry as well, if the Dark Lord is gone. What is he going to do with me? What shall we tell him at all? We shouldn't tell him the truth. Maybe I can just tell him that my mark vanished and I don't know why. Or should we say Harry killed him? I'll have to speak with Minerva, and we need to know from the Dark Lord what he's planning now. Before he could find an answer to any of his questions, he drifted off to a blissful sleep, only waking up when he heard Minerva's and Poppy's voices right next to him. What happened, Severus? Are both of you all right? McGonagall queried in a voice laced with concern. We're all right. The younger teacher quickly explained what had happened, finishing with the question, what shall we tell Albus? If we tell him the truth, he'll still send Harry after him because of his obsession with the Dark Lord, but frankly speaking, I'd prefer to watch how everything plays out at first. Perhaps Harry should urgently write a letter to Tom and ask him what he expects you to tell Albus, McGonagall suggested gently. Maybe that would be the best, Severus acknowledged, turning to the Medowitch. May we wake Harry up? You may wake him up, but he'll have to eat dinner first, just like you, Severus, Poppy answered sternly, before she gently applied a light touch to Harry's shoulder. Harry asked tiredly, hesitantly opening his eyes, before he struggled to sit up when he saw Pomfrey and the professors looking at him expectantly. How are you feeling, Harry? The Medowitch asked softly. Bit tired but fine, Harry mumbled, feeling as if he was still half asleep. It's time for dinner, McGonagall told him, while a house elf brought dinner for Severus and Harry as well as tea for the two ladies. No, Harry murmured, closing his eyes again. Harry, don't fall asleep right now, please. We need you to urgently write a letter to the Dark Lord. Severus' silky voice made him lazily open his eyes once more. Hey. And before that, you're going to eat something, McGonagall instructed him sternly, causing Harry to grudgingly munch a few bites of his dinner, before he pushed his plate away. Throwing his guardian a grateful look when he placed parchment and a quill on the table, Harry began to write. Hello Tom. I hope you've recovered and don't feel too lonely without your horrible former friends. Harry stopped, thoughtfully turning the quill in his hand, before he raised an eyebrow at Severus. Sorry, but what am I supposed to write, sir? While McGonagall shook her head in exasperation and Pomfrey chuckled, the potions master replied, Please ask him what we're supposed to tell Professor Dumbledore. If we let him know the truth, he'll still go after him, but since I have to inform him that the dark mark faded into nothing, he should advise us what he wants us to report. All right, sir, Harry replied and continued to write his letter. Tom, we need you to instruct Professor Snape what to tell Professor Dumbledore. I guess I'll tell everyone I vanquished you, and perhaps I'm going to receive the Order of Merlin for that, yay. Anyway, please consider your further plans and inform me what you want Professor Dumbledore to be told, if possible within the next few hours. What is the second task you want me to help by the way? Looking forward to your reply. Harry put the quill down and handed the letter to Severus, who smirked and let out a small whistle, causing a raven to fly into the room, landing on the potions master's shoulder. Here, Balthazar. Can you take this letter to the Dark Lord as fast as possible please? Snape instructed his familiar, fastening the letter to its foot. The raven let out a caw and took off. The three adults were still drinking tea together, when Beelzebub arrived. Ignoring Severus' offer to take the letter and hand it to Harry later, the vulture jumped onto Harry's hand, causing the boy to wake up with a jolt. Oh, Beelzebub, Harry mumbled sleepily, taking the letter off the vulture's foot. Seeing that Snape, McGonagall, and Pomfrey were looking at him interestedly, he proceeded to read the letter aloud. Harry, thanks to you and Severus for your valuable help. Tell the old fool that you had a vision about me telling Lucius Malfoy that there was only one way for you to kill me completely without having to get rid of the Horcruxes, which I created over the time, first. I even mentioned the spell you'd have to cast, which would be through an incantation in Parseltongue. When I kidnapped you on your shopping trip with Professor Snape in Hogsmeade, you remembered that spell and efficiently used it on me, killing me and completely vanishing my body and soul with it. Since the old fool will definitely use legilimency on you, I'm going to send you a fake vision as soon as Beelzebub returns to me, knowing that you'll have read this letter by then. You'll probably receive the Order of Merlin for your deed. Have fun with it. I'll inform you about my further plans in a few days' time. I'll need to plan the details first. Harry groaned as he set the letter aside. I hate these visions. Snape stood up and fetched a pain-relieving potion. Here Harry. Drink this in advance, he instructed the boy, who gratefully gulped down the potion and lay back on the sofa to await what was going to happen. He had nearly drifted back to sleep when all of a sudden his scar began to burn and he felt himself being pulled into a vision. Several minutes and 2 fake visions later, Harry allowed Snape to use legilimency in order to witness the kidnapping part of the story, in which he was involved as well. That was very thoughtful of Tom, Snape said as he pulled off. He sent the vision of his demise twice, once from Harry's point of view and once from mine. I hadn't thought that Voldemort was so considerate, McGonagall replied dryly, smiling at her younger colleague. All right, we have to inform the headmaster, Severus finally stated, rising from the edge of the sofa. Then you must call him here. Harry is not going anywhere, Pomfrey replied firmly, throwing the potions master a look, which told him to obey. He stepped to the fireplace, trying to give his voice a slight touch of relief. Albus, you're needed in my quarters. Please bring your pensieve. 2 minutes later, the headmaster stepped out of the fireplace, looking at the assembled members in surprise as he put the pensieve on the table. "Harry, do you know how to put something into a pensieve?" Severus asked gently. "The memory from the vision will do though. I can share my memory of the attack." Harry nodded, and 2 minutes later, a small silvery strand made its way into the pensieve, followed by another one from Snape's wand, and the 4 adults dove into the pensieve to watch the memories. "Harry, you fulfilled the prophecy," Dumbledore said in complete amazement after observing the demise of his greatest enemy. "Congratulations, my boy. I'll inform the Aurors and the Minister." With that, he stood up and headed back to the fireplace. "Professor," Harry called him back, "please don't tell them my name. I don't want more attention. Otherwise, I'll be gone, and you won't see me again." "Ah, my boy, but where would you go?" the headmaster asked gently, and Harry watched as his eyes were twinkling merrily. "I'm sure you'll receive the Order of Merlin for your deed." "Let me surprise you," Harry growled, throwing his guardian a pleading look. "Albus, you better take Mr. Potter's warning seriously," Snape voiced his concern, but Dumbledore was already gone. Harry grabbed a parchment and the quill that was still on the table and scribbled a note. "Hello Tom, I'm sorry, but now I need your help probably. Do you have a fireplace connected to the flow network, which I could use to flow to your place? I might need to hide from the headmaster. Please help me and answer quickly." Harry, putting down the quill, Harry handed the parchment to Severus, who called Dobby and asked him to take the letter to Tom Riddle, the former Dark Lord. "Yes, Master Professor Snape," Dobby replied, frightened. "Dobby, don't worry, he won't do anything to you, but I need his help, and I need it quickly." Dobby, maybe I need to hide from Dumbledore, would you go with me in that case?" The small elf bowed deeply. "Of course, Master Harry. Dobby Wills always goes with Master Harry, sir." "Thank you, Dobby," Harry replied warmly, and the elf popped away. "Harry, don't do anything stupid," McGonagall spoke up in concern, throwing the boy a worried look. "Professor, I promise that whatever I do, I'll always inform the 3 of you," Harry said sincerely. "I won't give up my schooling either. I'll find a way to hide from Dumbledore without throwing my life away. But I can't stand any more fussing than I already had to endure so far, especially since this time I didn't even do anything to earn it." "We will always try to help you, Harry," the deputy headmistress promised. All of a sudden, the fireplace flared, and Tom's head appeared in the flames. Snape quickly told Tom what had happened, explaining that McGonagall and Pomfrey were the only people knowing the truth and that Harry wanted to hide from Dumbledore. "Of course, Harry can come here," Tom replied. "I'll come over tomorrow morning to discuss how to proceed further," Severus announced. "Mr. Riddle, Harry is ill and not allowed to run around or do magic," Pomfrey threw in sternly. "All right, I'll keep an eye on him," Tom promised. Harry hesitantly walked over to the fireplace. "Tom, do you mind if I bring my free house elf, Dobby?" "Of course not. I don't have any elves," Tom replied, stepping away from the fireplace to give Harry space to flow over. Harry quickly called Dobby and asked him to bring his trunk and his school bag with him, before he stepped into the fireplace. Harry found himself in a very dark living room with huge bookshelves covering all 4 walls. Not exactly sure what to say to Tom, he was relieved when Dobby appeared with a pop. He introduced him to Tom, who eyed the elf curiously. "We know each other, don't we? You were the elf of the Malfoys, weren't you?" "Yes, but Master Harry freed me, and now I is a free elf, but still I belongs to Master Harry, sir." "Well, you could head up to the 2nd floor and prepare a room for your master, Dobby. All the rooms except for the master bedroom are free," Tom advised Dobby in a relatively friendly voice, before he turned to Harry. "So you want to hide from the old fool, because he wants the magical world to adore you even more?" "Yes, I'm sorry, but coming to you seemed to be the only option at the moment," Harry apologized, averting his eyes to the floor, noticing that the carpet held a small pattern of different non-magical herbs. Tom remained pensive for a few minutes, before he spoke up. "All right, I know what we're going to do. However, it will take a bit of time, and we need Severus to help us." Before Harry could ask Tom what his idea was, Dobby arrived with the news that his room was ready, and Tom sent him to bed, remembering Madame Pomfrey's order. "Harry, go to bed. We'll discuss this with Severus tomorrow," he said in a gentle but stern voice. Harry grudgingly followed Dobby up to his new room. "Am I willingly staying here together with Tom?" he thought, unbelievingly, while he drifted off to sleep. In the morning, Harry woke up to voices next to his bed. When he lazily opened his eyes, he recognized McGonagall and Pomfrey. "What are you doing here?" he queried. I mean, was it only a dream?" he mused. "Harry, you're at Riddle Manor," McGonagall explained gently. "Professor Snape promised to come to check on you today, but Professor Dumbledore already noticed your absence and made him go and check several places where he assumes you might be hiding this morning. That's why we came instead of him. Tom told me he had an idea but we needed Professor Snape's help with it," Harry said hesitantly. Before anyone could reply, Tom and Severus entered the room. Severus sighed, looking at his colleagues. "Unfortunately, I couldn't find a sign of Mr. Potter," he smirked. "Such a pity for Albus to realize that his golden boy is gone for good. I thought of the following," Tom began to explain. "First of all, I need a de-aging potion." Ignoring the collective gasp, he continued, "Harry, you're 16 and in your 6th year, aren't you?" "Yes," Harry replied, noticing that his scar had begun to prickle the instant Tom had entered the room. "All right, then I'd like to be de-aged to 17, so that I could attend the last Hogwarts year and begin a new life from there. Since everyone knows Harry and me, we need to change our appearance, and I thought maybe Severus could give us a blood potion using his own blood or that of one of his colleagues, who would be willing to become our distantly related aunt or uncle." "So you'd become my older brother?" Harry laughed, liking the idea immediately. "That way I can return to Hogwarts, even if with a different appearance and a new name," he mused, looking curiously from Snape to McGonagall and back. "Probably we'd need Professor Snape, because we're likely to be sorted into Slytherin," he mused aloud, causing everyone to throw him a questioning look. "You were in Gryffindor, Harry, weren't you?" Tom asked, a surprised expression on his face. "Yes, but only because I begged the Sorting Hat not to place me into Slytherin," Harry admitted in a small voice. "I don't know if I'd be able to convince him a second time. If I blood adopted you, well, if you drank the potion with my blood in it, you'd probably receive enough Gryffindor traits, so that at least you would be sorted into Gryffindor, Harry," McGonagall replied pensively. "Would that be acceptable for any of you, professors?" Harry hesitantly voiced his upcoming concern, eyeing the potion's master and his former head of house. "Yes, Mr. Potter. However, we have to look through the family history in order to see if there's a branch of the family splitting up, so that we could introduce you as the last remaining members of that branch," Snape explained, waving his wand consecutively at Minerva, Poppy, and himself, causing 3 pieces of parchment to emerge from the tip of his wand. He placed the 3 parchments, which displayed the family trees of the 3 colleagues, on Harry's bed, and everyone looked at them interestedly. "Here," McGonagall suddenly spoke up, "I believe that we have exactly what we need in the time of my grandparents. My grandfather's brother went to Australia, settling down over there. Look here, the tree ends with Robin and Andrew McGonagall." "That's brilliant," Tom agreed. "We could change their names to Robbie and Andy just in case these 2 showed up sometime in the future." "So what?" Harry asked impatiently. "We attended school in Australia and then our parents died and we found out that we had a cousin in Scotland. No, we could say our school burnt down, and since it was the only good school in Australia, Mum decided to send us to her Aunt Minerva, so that we could attend Hogwarts," Tom objected. "Yes, I believe that's better," Minerva replied. "All right, Minerva, Tom, Harry, are you sure that you want to carry out this plan?" Snape asked, smirking. "Severus, I believe this is a good idea, and it might be safer if they come to Hogwarts as Minerva's relatives than as yours, since Albus never had to question Minerva's loyalty in all these years," Pomfrey threw in, causing McGonagall to nod. "Yes, Severus, I'm willing to proceed with the plan." Tom, Harry, both voiced their agreement. "Very well. In that case I'll brew the potions tonight, provided that Albus has calmed down enough to leave me in peace," Snape promised. "However, you won't be able to show up at Hogwarts tomorrow or the day after. Even as Minerva's cousins, You have to wait for a few weeks, let's say until the Christmas holidays. Otherwise, it would be too easy for the headmaster to make a connection. He's not exactly stupid. The potions master raised an eyebrow, glancing from his colleagues to Tom and Harry. Nevertheless, they should take the potions as soon as possible in order to get used to their new bodies and roles, Pomfrey threw in. You have to study on your own for 2 months, but I'll come and bring you the assignments, and I can also teach you in the evenings or on the weekends, McGonagall promised. Apart from that, Harry, Tom has already taken his newts once and will be able to teach you in most subjects. Tom smirked. Don't promise such things, Professor. I probably forgot most of it. Professor Snape, Harry spoke up timidly, is there anything you can do for the pain in my scar? Whenever I'm near Tom it hurts. Severus frowned. I'm sorry, Harry, but at the moment I don't have an idea except for giving you a headache potion, but I promise I'll look into it and try to find something. All right, thank you, Harry replied, sighing in relief when the pain-relieving potion, which Pomfrey handed him, took effect. One more thing, Professor, he addressed Minerva. I'd like Hermione, but only her, to know the truth, and I'd appreciate if you could give Hedwig to her. You can tell Hedwig that I'll come back to Hogwarts and visit her, but that she should belong to Hermione. I'll call Hermione into my office this afternoon and tell her everything. I'll also ask her if I may copy her notes for you, McGonagall said calmingly, throwing Harry a fond smile. Tom, could you please extend your flow connection to Madame Pomfrey's in my office? I'll do that right away, Tom promised, quickly leaving the room. Upon his return, the 3 guests returned to Hogwarts, and Tom called Dobby for breakfast. Let's have breakfast downstairs, Harry said upset when Dobby obediently brought breakfast into his room. Didn't you hear Madame Pomfrey? She told you to stay in bed, Tom replied, grinning. When I lived with Snape, I was allowed to get up for meals too, Harry objected in a very upset voice. Remember Harry, at that time, you were still the famous, reckless Harry Potter. From now on, we'll be relatives of Professor McGonagall, the deputy headmistress of Hogwarts, and we'll have to behave as such. We won't do stupid things anymore. You mean like letting basilisks loose in the castle, Harry couldn't help throwing in. Exactly, Tom replied, his red eyes blazing. Here, eat, he ordered his soon-to-be younger brother. Early in the evening, Madame Pomfrey came back once more. Professor Snape brewed the potions for you, but he couldn't easily get away from Hogwarts, since the headmaster suspects everyone to be helping Harry. I could only leave, because I sometimes spend a few hours at St. Mungo's in order to be up to date with new healing methods and potions. Pomfrey looked around and conjured a second bed in Harry's room, motioning Tom to lie down. At first I'm going to give you the de-aging potion, and we'll have to see if it won't have any side effects, before I can give you the blood potion. The problem with the de-aging potion is that it's difficult to exactly determine the age in advance. Severus told me you should be around 17 if you drank it all, but since Harry is in no condition to look after a toddler, I'd prefer to give you only half the dose at first, just to be on the safe side. All right, Madame Pomfrey, Tom replied and lay down. Harry watched interestedly as he swallowed the potion, until Pomfrey told him to stop and took the still half-full phial back. Only an instant later, Tom began to moan in pain, and Pomfrey quickly spelled a pain-relieving potion into his system. 5 minutes later, when Tom slowly calmed down, she waved her wand over him and stated contentedly, "Congratulations, you're exactly 18 years and 3 days old. Well, a few months older than you wanted but still the right age to attend Hogwarts as a 7th year." That's right, Tom replied in obvious relief. Thank you very much, Madame Pomfrey. Thank God he didn't take the whole phial, Harry thought gratefully. I wouldn't want to look after a toddler right now. I suggest that you sleep over it, and I'll be back in the morning to give you the other potion. Pomfrey's voice penetrated his ear. If Harry wondered why they should wait until the morning, he understood the reason when he took the potion. It hurt. Each single part of his body seemed to change, leaving him in pain that lasted until Pomfrey spelled a potion into his stomach. You look like twins, the Meadowitch chuckled, causing the 2 boys to jump out of their beds and stand in front of a huge mirror, which the Meadowitch had conjured at the far wall. Apart from Harry's eyes, which had remained Lily's brilliant green, he looked completely like Minerva McGonagall, even if he was still a bit small for his age. Tom's eyes held the darker green of Minerva's eyes, and the boy looked like the spitting image of the Gryffindor head of house. "Very well," Pomfrey chuckled. "What were your names, by the way?" "Robbie McGonagall," Tom introduced himself, "and this is my younger brother Andy." Over the next few weeks, Robbie, Tom, and Andy, Harry, became used to living together. The de-aging potion Snape had brewed for Robbie ensured that he would keep his old memories hidden far away in his mind, but that he would feel, think, and behave according to his new age. Nevertheless, Robbie felt responsible for Andy since he was the older one of the two brothers, especially when he noticed that Andy's health condition was not the best, even if he still didn't know about his heart problem. Robbie and Andy spent most of the time studying and often helped each other when Robbie had forgotten something or Andy still didn't know other things, and Andy noticed in surprise that Robbie had completely changed and that they could study together very well. "It's nearly as good as having Hermione here," he mused, while he applied the corrections that Robbie had suggested to his Transfiguration homework. Snape, McGonagall, or Pomfrey came to Riddle Manor every evening to bring the two boys their assignments and to check on Andy. Seeing that the two teenagers got along very well, a week after they had taken the blood potions, McGonagall told Robbie about Andy's heart problem. "The problem is," she continued pensively, "what we're going to do about defense against the dark arts class at Hogwarts. Harry was already exempt from the class, and I'm afraid that the headmaster might suspect something since it is extremely rare that Madame Pomfrey excuses someone from a class on a permanent basis. Maybe she can excuse me for a different reason this time," Andy suggested timidly. "Perhaps she could tell the headmaster that Andy has some kind of muscle disease," Robbie proposed. "Is he allowed to fly at all?" "Harry was allowed to fly under certain conditions, but probably it will be better if Andy doesn't fly at all until he finishes school in order to distinguish him from Harry," McGonagall replied thoughtfully. "I'll discuss the question concerning the defense class with Madame Pomfrey and Professor Snape. We'll think of something. On a different note, both of you have to practice calling me Aunt Minerva." She smiled at the two boys, who looked so similar to herself. "Yes, Aunt Minerva," Robbie replied obediently, followed closely by a timid, "Yes, Aunt Minerva," from Andy. "I thought about something else," Andy spoke up. "We both need to have new wands before we go to Hogwarts, don't we? Dumbledore would recognize my wand immediately." "Yes, that's true, but we have to wait until right before you come to Hogwarts since you aren't even supposed in the country now," McGonagall replied firmly. "I'll take you to Diagon Alley before we go to Hogwarts together." After a few weeks of discussions, Snape, McGonagall, and Pomfrey agreed with the boys on an official version of their past. They had attended a small magical boarding school near Sydney, which was too tiny to be known in Europe. Unfortunately, the school had burned down a few months ago, and Andy had spent the last few months in a hospital because he had been hurt in the fire. Apart from burns and breathing problems, his heart had been affected, and he was still suffering from the after effects. "If anyone asks you about it, you can just tell them that you don't want to talk about it," Snape advised Andy, who nodded in relief. "At least this will give me a reason to exempt you from the defense against the dark arts class," Pomfrey said contentedly, causing Andy to throw her a grateful look. On the first day of the winter holidays, while most of the Hogwarts students boarded the train at Hogsmeade to travel home, Robbie and Andy met with their Aunt Minerva at the Leaky Cauldron. Together, they went to Ollivander's in order to buy new wands. Andy's new wand was Holly, 11-inch, and held a unicorn tail hair, while Robbie's new wand was Yew, 12-inch, with a unicorn tail hair like Andy's. "Our wands are still similar," Andy mused, glad when they left Ollivander's since he always felt slightly uncomfortable in the shop. "Robbie, you probably need new robes, don't you?" McGonagall inquired, glancing at the school robes Robbie was wearing. "Yes, Professor. Oh sorry, Aunt Minerva, these are Andy's," Robbie replied, smirking. They had spent a bit of time changing the Gryffindor crest on Andy's robes to the normal Hogwarts design and enlarging one of his robes, so that Robbie could wear them to Diagon Alley. "Do you need anything else, or are you ready to take the flow to Hogwarts?" McGonagall queried, throwing her two supposed-to-be cousins a questioning look. "Professor, is my scar hidden well enough?" Andy asked hesitantly. He had spent the last few days practicing to apply Muggle concealment powder on his scar, because a concealment spell or charm would be too risky since the headmaster would be able to cancel it if he became suspicious. His new guardian threw him a piercing look. "I can't see anything on your forehead," she said finally. They arrived at Hogwarts at lunchtime. However, before they headed down to the Great Hall, McGonagall made them sit down in her office, where they had arrived through the flow, and told them, "Yesterday, I received the guardianship papers from the ministry. I'm now officially your guardians. Of course, since Robbie is already of age, he doesn't have to have a guardian anymore, but in case you need someone, I'll be here for you. Professor Dumbledore knows about this of course, and you will always be able to stay in my private quarters if you wish so. For example, if you were sorted into Gryffindor, Andy, it would be advisable to stay with me, so that you don't have to climb up so many stairs." "All right, Professor. Thank you," Andy replied in a small voice, before he corrected himself, "Oh sorry, Aunt Minerva." McGonagall threw him a strict glance. "I suggest that we go and attend lunch in the Great Hall. Afterwards, we'll meet with the headmaster in his office, where you'll probably be sorted, before you'll need to see Madame Pomfrey for a checkup, so that she can confirm what we told the headmaster about Andy's condition. Please don't forget to behave as if you saw Hogwarts for the first time," she admonished the boys in a stern voice, before she ushered them out of her office. Andy hesitantly followed his brother and his aunt down to the Great Hall. "I just hope Dumbledore won't recognize me. I have to remember that I don't know anyone here except for McGonagall and Robbie, and I have to be careful what I call her," he mused, feigning curiosity and amazement as he entered the Great Hall and looked at the charmed ceiling. McGonagall introduced her cousins to the teachers and students, who had remained in the castle over the holidays, and Andy noticed surprised that Hermione was among the few students. Did something happen that she couldn't go home, or did she remain here, because she knew we were coming? He wondered, while he forced himself to eat a few bites of the delicious lunch the Hogwarts house elves had prepared. Thank God that Dobby spent a few hours each day at Hogwarts all these months, so that Dumbledore didn't notice that I took him with me. Otherwise he wouldn't have been able to come back now, he thought in relief. "Mr. Robbie and Mr. Andy McGonagall," Dumbledore's voice pulled Harry out of his reverie. "I'd like you to follow me into my office, so that we can ask the Sorting Hat to sort you in one of our houses. Afterwards, I'd like to have a few words with both of you." The two teenagers followed Dumbledore and McGonagall to the headmaster's office. Andy was feeling very anxious. "I just hope the Sorting Hat won't tell Dumbledore who we are," he thought, frightened. "I should have tried if I could think to Robbie through my scar. I wonder if he is as excited as I," he mused, hesitantly taking the offered seat next to Fawkes' perch, while Dumbledore fetched the Sorting Hat from his shelf. Robbie was the first to be sorted, and Andy was surprised how long it took the hat to make a decision. What do they have to discuss? It should be clear that he'll get sorted into Slytherin, he mused, anxiously shifting in his seat. Finally, the hat said aloud, "Ravenclaw." Andy had to force himself not to let out a huge gasp at the hat's decision. He tried hard to set up an indifferent expression as Dumbledore placed the sorting hat on his head. "Oh no, another one, whom I've sorted before. Do you think I'm doing all my work just for fun?" The hat's voice penetrated Andy's mind, causing Andy to flinch at his upset tone. "I'm really sorry. Could you please not tell the headmaster about the matter?" Andy begged the sorting hat, who grunted in annoyance. "I won't tell, but where am I going to sort you? You changed as well, and let me tell you something. This time, I'm not going to listen to your begging. It shall be Ravenclaw," the hat shouted, causing Andy to let out a huge gasp. "Did you expect something else?" Dumbledore asked gently. I'm sorry, sir." "Yes, sir. I mean, since my aunt is the Gryffindor head of house, I'd expected to be sorted into Gryffindor," Andy replied timidly. "It's nice to be in the same house, little brother," Robbie said, throwing Andy a comforting smile. "Very well, and Professor Flitwick is a very kind man," Dumbledore told the brothers. "Now Robbie, if you don't mind me calling you by your given name in order to distinguish you from your brother, Did you already tell your aunt which classes you want to take? Robbie shook his head. No, professor, we didn't speak about that yet, but since I'd love to become a teacher after my newts, I should at least take defense and charms, because these are my best subjects. Andy made a mental note to remind his brother to take the curse off the defense position and tuned out, while Dumbledore and Robbie discussed Robbie's timetable. How could the hat place both of us in Ravenclaw? He wondered. Well, over the last few months you have been too diligent for a Gryffindor, and since your new role is to play a timid boy and cousin of one of the professors, Ravenclaw is just adequate for you, a voice at the back of his mind replied that fortunately quietened when Dumbledore addressed Andy. Andy, your aunt told me that you suffered greatly by the fire and that you have to be exempt from defense because of heart problems and divination because of breathing problems. Is that correct? The headmaster asked gently. Yes, sir, Andy replied in a small voice, looking shyly at the professor when he felt the man try to enter his mind. Thank God Robbie taught me occlumency, Andy thought in relief, straightening his wards immediately. After a few seconds of prodding, the headmaster gave up. Your aunt also told me that she'd prefer if you stayed in her quarters instead of your dormitory because of your health problems. Nevertheless, it would be good if you spent some time in the Ravenclaw common room in order to get to know your housemates. Actually, the Ravenclaw house is not too far from your aunt's private quarters. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir, Andy replied politely. 5 minutes later, Andy's timetable was fixed. Knowing that neither McGonagall nor Pomfrey had spoken to the headmaster about Harry's ambitions to learn healing, he suggested healing as additional subject to charms, transfiguration, potions, herbology, and history of magic. Dumbledore agreed and wrote it into the timetable using the classes when his classmates had defense. However, you have to ask Madame Pomfrey if she is willing to teach you. She will probably give it a try, before she tells you if it's worth continuing or not. I'm going to send you to see her anyway, because I want her to assess your condition and see what she can do to help you. Dumbledore let out a long sigh. I'd like you to do exactly what Madame Pomfrey tells you. She has a very strong position here and is even able to overrule my decisions, he told a frightened-looking Andy. Don't worry, Andy, Madame Pomfrey is a very kind woman, McGonagall threw in calmingly, before she ushered the boys out of the office. That went well, Aunt Minerva, didn't it? Andy smiled on their way to the hospital wing, causing the deputy headmistress to throw him a proud smile. You played your role very well, sweetie, she commended Andy. Madame Pomfrey checked on both boys as if she saw them for the first time, noting all their data on new cards she made for them, knowing that the headmaster would surely come to look at Andy's card later on. How do I feign breathing problems? Andy asked uncomfortably, throwing the healer a questioning look. Pomfrey sighed. Unfortunately, you won't have to feign, Andy. You could in fact get problems with your breathing due to your heart condition. In that case, you have to come to see me immediately. Don't forget not to run, and if you're late for a class, you either come to me, and I'll give you a pass, or you explain the reason for being late to your teacher. If anyone gives you a hard time because of something that is caused by your condition, please tell me and I'll speak to them. Even Dumbledore is afraid of her, Andy mused, grinning, before he replied, Yes, Madame Pomfrey. Thank you. I'll check on you at the beginning of our healing class, but on all other days I need to see you in the evening, Andy, Pomfrey told him in a stern voice. Yes, Madame Pomfrey, Andy replied evenly, already knowing from Robbie that the curse he had been hit with was irreversible and permanent. McGonagall led both boys into her private quarters, to which Dobby had added 2 new rooms. Aunt Minerva, why is Hermione here? Andy asked as soon as they had entered their private rooms. She was very worried about you, and she thought it might be a good chance to officially get to know you since only a few students are here over the holidays, McGonagall explained softly, causing a small smile to play on the boy's lips. That's nice. I missed her so much, Andy replied, feeling very grateful towards his best friend. I can call her to my office later on, Minerva promised. However, we have to go and see Professor Flitwick first, since he is your head of house. I just wanted to show you your own rooms first, so that it'll be easier for Robbie to decide if he wants to stay in the dormitory or at home or in our quarters. She quickly showed the boys their rooms, before they left for the head of Ravenclaw's office. Phileas, my cousins were both sorted into Ravenclaw, McGonagall told her colleague, causing the small teacher to throw her an enthusiastic smile. After a short introduction, Flitwick led his 2 new students to the Ravenclaw common room and showed them around. Your aunt already said that you were going to stay with her, Andy, but what about you, Robbie? Are you going to stay in your dormitory, or will you return home for the nights too? He asked gently. I think I'd like to remain at home together with Andy, if you and my aunt don't mind, Professor, Robbie replied thoughtfully. It's only for a few months until the Newts anyway. All right, the professor replied, beaming with happiness about his new house members. By the time they returned to their quarters, Andy felt absolutely worn out. While Robbie was discussing something with his aunt, he stole himself into his room and let himself fall on his bed, where he drifted off into an exhausted sleep. An hour and a nightmare, in which he saw Cedric die once more. Later, Andy woke up to a cool hand on his forehead. Andy, are you all right? His guardian's voice penetrated his ears, causing him to lazily open his eyes. Yes, I'm sorry, Aunt Minerva, I was so tired when we came back, Andy replied, still feeling exhausted. Then it was good that you were reasonable enough to go to bed, Minerva reassured him, before she queried, are you feeling well enough to see Hermione? Yes, of course, Andy beamed and slowly scrambled out of his bed, missing the concerned look his guardian threw him. Where is Robbie? He inquired, surprised that his brother seemed to be absent. He went to see Professor Snape to ask him about potions tutoring for both of you, McGonagall replied, motioning Andy to sit down on the sofa, before she headed to the Gryffindor common room to call Hermione. Hermione entered the teacher's living room, throwing Andy a curious look, while McGonagall returned to her office, leaving the door slightly ajar. Hi, my own, Andy said, smiling at his best friend. Hello Andy, you look absolutely gorgeous, Hermione blurted out, obviously unable to take her eyes off her friend's thin form. Thank you, Andy replied shyly. This is Hermione, who has been my best friend from my first year onwards, he told himself. The hat sorted me into Ravenclaw together with Robbie, and he told me it was not negotiable this time, he said sadly. Oh, that's too bad, Hermione replied, shocked. Well, we still have a few classes together like potions, transfiguration, and charms. Are you going to stay in Ravenclaw? No, Andy shook his head. I have my own room here in my aunt's quarters, and she told me I had to stay here. Robbie chose to remain here as well, so that I'm not the only student in a teacher's quarters. Do you think she'll let me visit you here? Andy shrugged. I can't see why not. You're already here, and I haven't even spent a night here. The two friends talked for a while, before all of a sudden the door was flung open and Robbie stormed into the room. Oh Andy, you have to help me, the older boy blurted out, only stopping himself when he noticed Andy sitting together with a girl. Excuse me, he apologized. I'm Robbie, he informed Hermione in a gentler voice. Hello Robbie, I'm Hermione, and I know exactly who you are, Hermione smiled, looking from Andy to Robbie and back. What is it that you need help with? Andy queried softly, causing Robbie to groan in frustration. I need you to help me with potions, Robbie told his brother, causing Hermione to smirk. I can help both of you if you want, Hermione offered. That would be great, Andy agreed immediately, explaining to Robbie, Hermione is the best of all the 6th years, not only in potions but in everything. That'll give us the chance to spend some time together, he mused, and Robbie and Hermione could see a small smile lit up his face. All of a sudden, Minerva entered the room, smiling at the sight of the 3 students talking animatedly. It's time for dinner. Let's head down to the Great Hall. Andy's face darkened immensely at the thought of dinner. Professor, may I stay here please? I'm not hungry, he asked in a hardly audible voice. Andy, what's wrong? Are you feeling unwell? Robbie inquired. A bit, Andy admitted. I'm fine, but I'm so tired. McGonagall sighed, throwing a concerned glance in his pale face. All right, Andy, you may lie down and rest, but I'll force you to eat dinner later on. Thank you, Aunt Minerva, Andy replied in relief, before he headed back to his room and went straight to bed. When Minerva and Robbie returned from dinner, they cautiously entered Andy's room in order not to wake him up in case he was asleep. They noticed worriedly that his cheeks were flushed and that pearls of sweat were covering his forehead. His breathing was labored as if he had difficulties to inhale. "He is ill," McGonagall stated, sighing. "I'm going to call Madame Pomfrey." A few minutes later, the Medowitch entered the room and began to cast her diagnostic spells on the boy. When she finally put her wand away, her face was grave. Not only his heart but also his immune system was impaired by the spell, and obviously it wasn't able to cope with all the viruses it was exposed to at Diagon Alley. He caught the wizard's flu. "I cast a spell on him that'll prevent you from getting the flu. Nevertheless, I should take him with me," Pomfrey added thoughtfully. "No, Poppy, leave him here please. If you tell us what to do, we'll look after him," Minerva objected. "He'll be more comfortable here." Pomfrey sighed. "He will, but he'll probably need a week of bed rest since our normal flu potion is too strong for him considering his heart problems. I'll have to discuss this with Severus. For the moment, I can only give him a fever reducer, but I'll come back as soon as I know more." She spelled a fever reducer straight into the boy's system. "Is there anything we can do for him?" Robbie inquired, stepping nearer to his brother's bedside. "Try to keep him cool and take his temperature every few hours." Pomfrey handed him a magical thermometer, explaining, "The result will be displayed on my watch, so that I'll know if it gets worse." While Andy was ill, Minerva, Robbie, and Hermione took turns keeping him company, and Madame Pomfrey and Professor Snape alternately came and checked on him. In spite of being so ill, Andy was very happy to have his new family or his best friend with him all the time. Never before had he felt so cared for. He had to spend the whole holidays in bed, and even when school began at the beginning of January, Pomfrey only grudgingly allowed him to attend classes, demanding that he had to return to Minerva's quarters after his last afternoon class. Andy still felt bad enough not to complain and spent the rest of the afternoons and the evenings on the sofa in the living room, doing his homework and resting. "It would be easier to get used to everything if I could spend the evenings in the common room," he mused, noticing that it was difficult to adapt to his new situation. "It's bad enough that I have to pretend not to know my former good friends like Ron, Ginny, and Neville, but now I'm even in a different house, so that I can't easily get to know them again." Everything was much easier for Robbie, because he didn't know anyone. His days in Slytherin lay long in the past, and he could spend the evenings in the Ravenclaw common room, getting to know his housemates. Unbeknownst to Andy, his guardian was watching him in concern, noticing that he was unhappy, which apparently wasn't only caused by his bad health condition. When she observed him one afternoon, seeing that he was constantly rubbing his forehead as if he was suffering from a bad headache and that his cheeks were unnaturally flushed, she sat next to him on the sofa, softly prying the quill out of his hands. "Andy, what's wrong?" McGonagall asked softly. "Oh, nothing, I'm sorry," Andy replied in a small voice, causing the teacher to let out a small snort. "I'm sorry, my boy, but I know you too well to believe that. Are you feeling worse tonight, or did something happen during your classes?" She carefully placed a hand on the boy's forehead, which felt very warm to the touch. Noticing that Andy unconsciously leaned into the cold touch, she pulled him close, making him lean against her. "Did you have a fight with someone?" she queried softly. Andy sighed, slightly shivering as he leaned deeper into his guardian's robes. "After lunch, Hermione and I went out for a small walk around the lake. We wanted to discuss our potions assignment," he finally began to explain, fiercely rubbing his forehead. "But then Ron came over to us and began to insult me. He said I thought I was better than the others because I was your nephew and didn't even have to stay in my dormitory overnight, but that I didn't have the right to take his girlfriend away, especially as I wasn't even in their house, and if I didn't let go of Hermione, he'd challenge me to a duel. I'm surprised that Ms. Granger didn't come to me to inform me," McGonagall mused aloud. "She's probably still fighting with Ron. She immediately began to fight with him," Andy sighed, rubbing his forehead. "I'll speak with both of them after dinner," Minerva promised, giving the boy a piercing look. "Is that what caused your condition to worsen?" "I don't know. I didn't feel well in the first place," Andy replied in a small voice, glancing at the professor from half-open, glassy eyes. May I skip dinner and go to bed, please? Yes, I believe that's where you belong, Minerva said decisively and followed Andy into his room. With a flick of her wand, she exchanged his school clothes with his pajamas and gently tucked him in, before she stuck the thermometer under his tongue, frowning as it flared orange after a few seconds. I'll call Madame Pomfrey, sweetie, she said in a soft voice, placing a cool cloth on the boy's forehead, before she left the room. It took a few minutes, before Madame Pomfrey bustled into the room. She sat on the edge of Andy's bed and lit the tip of her wand, peering into Andy's mouth, ears, and eyes, while she told Minerva, Robbie cast a spell on Ronald Weasley, causing him to stutter. So far, I wasn't able to reverse the spell, and Ms. Granger, who accompanied Mr. Weasley to the hospital wing, said that Robbie had told her it would wear off in a week's time. According to Ms. Granger, Mr. Weasley angered Andy, and when she told Robbie about it, he cast the spell to avenge his brother. Suddenly, tears began to pour out of Andy's eyes. Did he really do that for me? He whispered in absolute amazement, while he felt a comfortable feeling of warmth spread over his body. Yes, sweetie, Robbie did that to avenge you, Pomfrey replied, smiling. Nevertheless, you made yourself so upset that you managed to aggravate your condition. I'm going to give you a sleeping draught, and I want you to let your aunt check on you tomorrow morning, and if you're not remarkably better, you won't be able to attend classes. She gently helped Andy to sit up and made him swallow a light fever-reducing potion laced with a sleeping draught, causing the boy to drift off to sleep in the blink of an eye. Unbeknownst to Andy, McGonagall conducted a very stern talk with Ron, threatening to involve his mother if he didn't leave Andy in peace. When Ron complained that she didn't take points from Robbie although Robbie had cast the stuttering spell at him, she took 20 points from Ravenclaw, causing Ron to smile, before she took 20 points from Gryffindor for Ron's behavior towards Andy. Ron angrily returned to the Gryffindor common room, sitting down next to Hermione, who exceptionally spent the evening in the common room, because Andy, with whom she normally studied in the evenings, was asleep. Circa. Clear that she would revenge her nephews, but you'll get back at those McGonagall boys, Ron miffed. When Hermione took a seat next to Andy in the potions classroom, glad to see her friend up and about again, she told him about Ron's threat. Well, I assume first of all he has to try to properly cast a spell. As long as he is stuttering like he did in Transfiguration, he won't be able to do anything to me, Andy replied calmly, not noticing that Snape had just entered the classroom. Mr. McGonagall, if you don't want to serve detention in the potions classroom tonight. Snape began in a stern but not unfriendly voice, causing the Slytherin girls to giggle. No, I'm sorry, Professor, Andy hurriedly interrupted the teacher and tried to concentrate on the lesson. He sighed in relief when he bottled his flawlessly brewed potion, not wanting to get on the professor's bad side anymore. Andy, shall we take a walk around the lake after lunch? Hermione queried on their way to the Great Hall for lunch. Andy sighed. I'm sorry, my own, but McGonagall only let me go this morning when I promised to come back home after lunch and rest until the beginning of the afternoon classes. Would you perhaps mind joining me in our quarters? There is something I'd like to speak about with you. Do you think your aunt won't mind? No, I don't think so, Andy replied and hurried to the head table to ask his guardian, giving Hermione a thumbs up when he finally sat down between Mandy and Robbie at the Ravenclaw table. After lunch, Andy motioned Hermione to follow him into his room, where he took a seat on his bed, leaving the chair in front of his desk to Hermione. What is it that you wanted to ask me, Andy? Hermione queried, throwing Andy a curious look. Andy couldn't help blushing a bit. Oh, this is difficult. How am I going to ask her? He wondered, feverishly searching for words. You know, when Ron verbally attacked me yesterday, he said something about stealing his girlfriend. I just thought, are you going out with Ron? Hermione sighed. No, Andy. As you know, we went out for a few weeks at the beginning of our 5th year, but I ended our relationship after a few weeks. You know how jealous Ron becomes, and I can't have a boyfriend who is jealous just because I exchange a few words with a friend. Ron, however, still seems to think he owns me, or perhaps it's just because the three of us were always best friends, and when you were Harry it was still alright, but now as he assumes you're someone else, he's getting jealous again. He doesn't have a reason though, because I'm not his girlfriend. I understand, Andy replied thoughtfully. My own, would you perhaps be willing to become my girlfriend? He asked in a small voice, hesitantly turning his eyes to the girl, while his face took on a hopeful expression. Hermione threw her friend a fond smile, before she moved to sit down next to him on the edge of his bed. Andy, I'd love to become your girlfriend, she agreed in a soft voice, carefully leaning her head onto his shoulder. Andy gently laid an arm around her back. Thank you, my own, for making me so happy, he whispered, feeling absolutely delighted. I'm very happy too, Hermione said softly. All of a sudden, there was a knock at the slightly ajar door, and Minerva entered the room, looking at the two students in surprise. I'm sorry to disturb you. I just wanted to remind you that the afternoon classes are going to commence in 15 minutes. She stepped over to Andy and laid a hand on his forehead. You're still a bit warm. Are you feeling all right? I'm fine, Aunt Minerva. Hermione just agreed to become my girlfriend, he beamed, looking happily at his guardian. The teacher smiled at the good news. Congratulations, Andy and Hermione. I'm very happy for the two of you. Thank you, Professor, Hermione replied, smiling. All right, Andy, if we don't want to be late for History of Magic, we'll better go. You may leave through my office. That's much nearer to the History of Magic classroom, Minerva conceded, causing Andy to sigh in relief. The two friends spent the next class speaking to each other in low voices, causing Ron, who was sitting at the other end of the classroom, to throw them angry looks. Andy, do you want me to join you after dinner? Hermione inquired, before they separated at the huge staircase, from where she headed to Defense Against the Dark Arts, while Andy had to attend his healing class. I'd love to study together, Andy replied, knowing that Hermione always spent the time until dinner in the library. Madame Pomfrey made Andy sit on the edge of a bed next to a dummy and taught him how to heal the dummy's scratches. Andy found the spells relatively easy, until he had to heal a scratch that was badly infected. I'll teach you how to deal with that tomorrow, Pomfrey promised, laughing at his confused expression, and dismissed Andy, noticing that he was exhausted. Over the next days, Hermione and Andy made a habit of walking around the lake after lunch. One day, they slowly walked around the lake as usual when all of a sudden one of the school owls arrived with a message for Hermione. Dear Ms. Granger, please come to my office for a moment. McGonagall. Hermione frowned, sighing. I'm sorry, Andy, but I'll have to go and see what McGonagall wants. No problem, my own. I'll wait here for you, Andy replied, giving the girl a fond smile, before she hurried back into the castle. Andy slowly walked back around the lake in the direction of the entrance doors, deep in thoughts. I'm so happy that she is my girlfriend, he mused. Finally, he stopped walking and began to throw stones into the water. He was so engrossed in thought that he didn't hear someone approach, but suddenly, he felt himself being pushed forward, so that he fell headfirst into the lake. Fortunately, Andy could swim. However, the water was so cold that he had the impression as if his body was going to freeze and his heart would stop beating any minute. Before he could even reach the surface, he felt his mind slip away. He neither noticed that the giant squid gently heaved him out of the water nor that Robbie appeared out of nothing, scooping him up in his arms. His brother hurriedly carried him to the hospital wing, running into Hermione and Minerva in the entrance hall. Is he all right? Hermione queried, paling at Robbie's concerned face. Robbie, what happened? McGonagall inquired, her mouth stretched to a thin line. I went after Andy and Hermione, sorry Hermione, under Andy's invisibility cloak, because I was worried that something might happen to Andy after he told me what Weasley had said to Hermione a few days ago. I watched Hermione run back into the castle, but I didn't think of anything and just waited, observing Andy, when all of a sudden Weasley appeared and pushed him into the lake. The giant squid rescued Andy, otherwise, I'm sure he wouldn't have made it. He gently laid Andy on a bed, while Minerva called Pomfrey, who hurried over to Andy and worriedly began to fuss over him. After a few minutes, She turned to Minerva, Hermione, and Robbie with a devastated expression on her face. I'm not sure if he'll make it. Please leave me alone with him for the moment. Minerva, please send Severus to me and ask the headmaster to cancel his afternoon classes. With that, Pomfrey turned back to Andy, connecting him to several monitors that instantly began to beep and blink, displaying various numbers. Professor McGonagall ushered Hermione and Robbie into Pomfrey's office and headed to the fireplace, calling the potions master. Andy is in a critical condition after Weasley pushed him into the lake, she quickly filled her colleague in. Poppy wants you and told me that Albus should cancel your afternoon classes. All right, Snape gave back, already heading towards Andy's bed. Sighing, the deputy headmistress returned to the fireplace. Albus, I need you to cancel Severus' classes for the whole afternoon and to flow into Poppy's office immediately. Bring your pensieve, please. Oh my, Minerva, what's wrong? Dumbledore replied, shocked by the tone in his old friend's voice. A few minutes later, he stepped out of the fireplace and listened to his deputy's explanation, causing the twinkle in his eyes to vanish completely. Robbie, can you put the memory into the pensieve, please? McGonagall urged the boy, who obeyed immediately. Together, they viewed the memory, and when they emerged a few minutes later, their faces expressed anger, rage, shock, and disbelief. Did Mr. Weasley know about Andy's condition? The headmaster finally turned to Hermione in a gentle voice. Yes, of course. Everyone knows that, because he has to stay with Professor McGonagall instead of sleeping in Ravenclaw. He even ridiculed Andy about that before, Hermione replied, hurriedly wiping the few tears from her cheeks that had managed to escape from the corners of her eyes. In that case, we'll have to question him under Veritaserum. If Andy did not survive this ordeal, it would be a one-way ticket to Azkaban for Mr. Weasley, Dumbledore said gravely. Seeing that McGonagall's eyes filled with tears, Robbie quickly laid an arm around her shoulders. He'll be all right, Aunt Minerva. Andy is strong in spite of his weak heart, and his powerful magic will help him to survive. Dumbledore called a house elf, instructing him to put up a sign at the Transfiguration classroom door with a cancellation note for all afternoon classes and to fetch Ron Weasley to the headmaster's office, before he turned to Andy's family and girlfriend. Please follow me to my office. You're all excused from your afternoon classes. Silently, they crossed the hospital wing, where Pomfrey and Snape were waving their wands at Andy and discussing what they could do to help him, and headed up to the office behind the gargoyle. Dumbledore hurried to the fireplace and called Mrs. Weasley, who arrived instants later, looking around worriedly. I was used to being called here while the twins were at Hogwarts, she said surprised, but what is it now? Your son Ronald did something, which is much worse than anything the twins would have ever been capable of, McGonagall replied in an extremely angered voice. He pushed my nephew into the lake in spite of knowing that he suffers from a heart failure. Mrs. Weasley gasped. Oh no, Minerva, is he all right? Seeing that her head of house came close to crying again, Hermione replied in a soft voice, we don't know that yet. Ron was jealous of Andy, because he is my boyfriend. I ended my relationship with Ron more than a year ago, but still he has been bothering Andy since he learned that we're friends. While Mrs. Weasley watched the memory in the pensieve, there was a knock at the door, and Dumbledore called Ron in, motioning him to a seat, before he asked the boy to explain what happened at the lake an hour ago. Seeing that Ron was feigning innocence, Robbie spoke up. You don't have a chance to deny. I saw everything, hidden under an invisibility cloak. I'm sorry, I know this is off topic, but where did you get an invisibility cloak? They are extremely rare. Dumbledore curiously turned to Robbie, causing Minerva and Hermione to frown. Oh, I don't own it, Robbie explained quickly. It belongs to Hermione. She told me she received it from a friend recently. It was Harry's, but he gave it to me together with his owl. When he left us, Hermione gratefully continued the explanation, causing Dumbledore to nod contentedly, while Ron threw her an angered glare. Why did he give everything to you? He asked angrily. I was supposed to be his best friend, not you. Ronald. Mrs. Weasley, who had just left the pensieve with an expression of utmost shock on her face, suddenly shouted. Behave yourself, Ronald, and stop being jealous of everything and everyone. Mr. Weasley, for the moment, you're merely suspended from Hogwarts, and I'll leave you in your mother's care. Your belongings will be brought to you later today. However, we might want to question you under Veritaserum at any time, and if Mr. McGonagall doesn't survive the ordeal you put him in, you'll most definitely receive a one-way ticket to Azkaban because of murder, the headmaster explained in a grave voice. If and when you'll be allowed back to Hogwarts, depends on young Mr. McGonagall. Mrs. Weasley stepped over to Minerva, pulling her into a light embrace. I'm so sorry, Minerva. As a mother I know how you must be feeling. It's not your fault, Molly, Minerva replied softly. I'll call you as soon as I know more. With that, Mrs. Weasley ushered her son into the fireplace, said goodbye to everyone present, and followed Ron back to the burrow. Minerva, Hermione, and Robbie walked back to the hospital wing, where Madame Pomfrey was still fussing over Andy, while Professor Snape was nowhere to be seen. Let's sit in Madame Pomfrey's office and watch for a while. We don't want to disturb her, Minerva suggested, motioning the two students to follow her. Seeing that Minerva and Hermione weren't able to think or talk about anything else out of worry about Andy, Robbie excused himself for the washroom, where he called Dobby and asked him to bring tea for them laced with a calming draught, before he returned to keep the two witches company. They spent the whole afternoon in the office, waiting for the Medowitch to tell them that Andy would be all right. However, at dinner time, Madame Pomfrey threw them out of the hospital wing. You will attend dinner and return to where you belong afterwards. If I know more, I'll call Dobby and send him to inform you, but I don't want to see any of you back here today, she told them in a stern voice. A dark thought, only one can survive while the other is alive, passed Robbie's mind when he walked back to Ravenclaw that evening, but he dismissed the thought immediately. Only late in the evening, Pomfrey called McGonagall. Minerva, Andy is out of danger. He is awake right now, and you may come and see him if you wish. A minute later, the deputy headmistress took a seat on the edge of Andy's bed, noticing that the boy was even paler than normal if that was possible. His cheeks were deeply flushed, and his breathing was labored and irregular. Hello, sweetie, she said softly, gently stroking his cheeks, which felt very warm to the touch. Hi, Aunt Minerva, Andy replied weakly, smiling his guardian. Do you know who pushed me into the lake? He queried in a small voice. Ronald Weasley, McGonagall responded sternly. He has been suspended for the moment, and we'll think about how to prevent that he attacks you further, before he'll be allowed to come back. Andy sighed. He is jealous. He has always been jealous of me, even when I was Harry, but it's all right, I'm used to it. No, Andy, it's not all right, Minerva objected vehemently. You nearly died today. Professor Snape and Madame Pomfrey worked to help you the whole afternoon, and only a few minutes ago it became clear that you were out of danger. Still, you have a lung infection and have to remain here for a week. Did Ron bring me here? No, Andy. Robbie followed you and Hermione under your invisibility cloak. He watched everything, and when the giant squid rescued you, he brought you here. He and Hermione were here together with me all afternoon. I'll have to go and tell them that you're all right. They're beside themselves with worry. Try to get some sleep, Andy. I'll be back in the morning. K. Good night, Aunt Minerva. Good night, sweetie, Minerva replied, placing a key on Andy's forehead. At the same time, Robbie was sitting alone in the Ravenclaw common room doing his homework. All of a sudden, a voice penetrated his ears. I know that Andy isn't really your brother, but... Like in a trance, Robbie put his quill down and slowly turned his head. I know who your brother is, but I'm glad that you get along so well and that Professor McGonagall took him in, the girl, who was standing next to his chair, told Robbie. I'm sorry, but who are you? Robbie queried finally. Oh, excuse me, I'm Luna Lovegood, the girl replied in a soft voice. I'm one of Harry Potter's best friends. Before Robbie could reply, Dobby appeared, bowing. Master Robbie, Mistress Pomfrey sends me to tells you that Master Andy is out of danger, he reported eagerly, causing Robbie to sigh in relief. Thanks for telling me, Dobby. That's good news indeed, Robbie replied, before he turned back to Luna. What happened? She queried, absent-mindedly playing with her hair. Ron Weasley pushed him into the lake. He was jealous because of Andy being Hermione's boyfriend, Robbie explained shortly. Ah, he is so stupid, nearly causing the death of his best friend. If he only knew who Andy was, Luna gave back in a sing-song, causing Robbie to get the impression as if his heart was being filled with music. She's cute, he mused. Each of Andy's friends is adorable. How did you know that Andy was Harry? The thought suddenly struck his mind. Luna sighed, smiling. I just know that. Everyone would know, if they only took the trouble to peer inside a person, but they content themselves looking at the outer shell of someone. Do you think anyone else suspects something? He inquired, concerned. No, Robbie, they are all ignorant, Luna smiled. A week later, Andy was finally released from the hospital wing. Back in their quarters, Minerva queried, Andy, over the next few days, we'll have to decide what to do with Ronald Weasley. So far, he is merely suspended, and Professor Dumbledore told him that it depended on you if and when he'd be allowed to come back to Hogwarts. What do you think, Andy? Andy remained pensive for a moment, although he had already spent much time in the hospital wing pondering the matter. I'd like to talk to him and tell him the truth, provided that he'll be put under a spell that prevents him from spilling my secret to others, he finally replied. If he promises to leave me in peace, he can return at any time. Oh well, let me put him under a spell that prevents him from harming anyone again first, Robbie threw in with a determined expression on his face. Minerva frowned. Would that be a dark spell, Robbie? Does it matter? Robbie gave back, smirking, causing Andy to chuckle. Yes, it matters, Minerva replied sternly. Don't forget that you're a McGonagall now, and as such you're not supposed to use dark spells, especially not here at the school. All right, Aunt Minerva, Robbie admitted. But really, if Weasley comes back to Hogwarts, we'll have to make sure that he can't do anything to Andy. We should speak with Professor Dumbledore about it. I'm sure that there must be a light spell to ensure that I'll be safe from Ron, Andy suggested. Minerva threw him a piercing look. Andy, do you know what a wizard's oath is? We can force him to make a wizard's oath stating that he won't harm you again. If he acts against his oath, he won't survive his deed. That sounds a bit cruel though, doesn't it? Andy voiced doubtfully, causing Minerva and Robbie to glare at him. This is about your safety, Andy, Minerva replied sternly, which is more important than anything else. They decided to invite Ron together with his mother to visit them on the next day, which fortunately was a Sunday, before Robbie efficiently changed the topic. Andy, you know Luna, don't you? She guessed who you are. Luna, Andy blurted out, flabbergasted. She hardly saw me after we returned to Hogwarts. If she managed to see behind our masquerade, then Dumbledore should be able as well. I don't think so, Andy, Minerva replied soothingly. Ms. Lovegood seems to possess very special abilities, which apparently enable her to look through your masquerade. I believe that too, Andy, Robbie agreed. She told me she could sense Harry in you. She's a very cute girl, by the way. Andy nodded at his brother. That she is, and she is a good friend of mine, or at least she was when I was Harry. But the other people in Ravenclaw always make fun of her, claiming that she is strange. I've often helped her find her books or clothes that her housemates took away from her. At 10 o'clock on Sunday morning, Mrs. Weasley stepped through the Flow network into Minerva's office, followed closely by her youngest son. Minerva, Andy, Robbie, and Hermione were assembled in the office and greeted the guests. Molly, Mr. Weasley, Andy would like to tell you something. Before I can allow this, however, I have to insist that you let me put you under a spell, which prevents you from speaking about what he explains to you to others. Will you agree? Of course, Minerva, Mrs. Weasley replied immediately. Please put us under that spell. Mr. Weasley, will this be all right for you as well? Yes, Ron replied with a stubborn expression on his face. Although I'm not interested in listening to something your nephew has to say. Ronald, Mrs. Weasley and Hermione scolded the boy simultaneously, while Minerva cast the spell on Ron and his mother. I'm Harry, Andy said quietly, causing Ron to snort. And why would I believe that? He asked, glancing at the other boy. Well, you could ask me something nobody else could know, Andy suggested, grinning. Ron thought for a moment, before Mrs. Weasley told him, now go on, Ronald. If this is Harry, I have to pull him into a bear hug. What is the incantation to activate the Marauder's map? Ron queried. I solemnly swear that I'm up to no good, Andy replied without thinking. Why did Snape want to expel us when we arrived for our second year? Because we flew your father's car. Of which team is the Quidditch poster over your bed in my room at the Burrow? Andy grinned. It's the one of the Gryffindor team with you as keeper and me as seeker, which Colin took last year. Harry, Ron blurted out, hesitantly looking at his best friend, while Mrs. Weasley pulled Andy in a bear's hug. I'm still Andy though, and I'd appreciate it if you didn't call me Harry in the open, Andy spoke up as soon as Mrs. Weasley released him. Don't worry, Andy, the spell will see to that, Minerva replied calmingly. Mr. Weasley, you may return to Hogwarts under one condition. You have to swear a wizard's oath that you'll never harm Andy again and keep his secret. Are you willing to swear such an oath? Ron's expression changed to an angry frown, before he replied, well, if Harry swears to stay away from Hermione, I'll agree with your conditions. Hermione opened her mouth in exasperation. However, before she could even think of an adequate reply, Mrs. Weasley hissed at her son, Ronald. Hermione separated from you a year ago, mostly because your jealousy towards everyone else. After what you did to Andy, you can be lucky if Hermione does as much as speak with you at all. Well, then I'd like to be resorted, which must be possible since Harry was resorted as well, so that I don't have to see her all day. Hermione hardly spends time in the common room, but if you insist on being resorted, I'll speak with the headmaster about the matter, and I don't think it will be a problem, Minerva replied, slightly confused at the boy's desire. We need you to swear your oath before meeting the headmaster though. Mrs. Weasley taught Ron how to swear a wizard's oath, and the boy said, I swear not to harm Harry and to keep his secret by my magic. Very well, Mr. Weasley, I'm going to call the headmaster then. Please wait a moment. Minerva headed over into her private quarters in order to exchange a private word with Dumbledore from the fireplace in her living room. However, she had just lit the fire in the fireplace when Andy followed her, a panicking expression on his face. Aunt Minerva, Andy breathed. What if he calls me Harry in front of the headmaster? Minerva let out a long sigh. Andy, calm down please. I know that he insisted on calling you Harry, but he won't be able to do so in front of others, who don't know who you are. Don't worry about it. Are you really sure about that? Yes, Andy, you have my word, Minerva replied soothingly, before she proceeded to call Dumbledore. Albus, could you please come to my office and bring the sorting hat, if you don't mind letting Ronald Weasley being sorted again on his own wish. 2 minutes later, the headmaster stepped out of the fireplace, the sorting hat in his hands. I heard that you wished to be resorted, he queried sternly, looking at Ron without the usual twinkle in his eyes. Yes sir, the boy replied in a slightly upset voice. Very well, Dumbledore replied, handing the hat to Minerva, who placed it on Ron's head. Oh, this is difficult, the hat spoke up in a small voice, only for Ron to hear. You don't really fit in any house, not in Hufflepuff due to your lack of loyalty, not in Ravenclaw due to your laziness, not in Gryffindor because of your cowardice. Maybe it has to be. The hat straightened, before shouting, Slytherin. Ron tried in vain to cover his shock by a small smile that didn't even reach his eyes. Very well, Mr. Weasley, please accompany me to Professor Snape's office. As your new head of house he will wish to speak with you, before you'll be allowed back to Hogwarts, the headmaster spoke up in a firm voice. Molly, I'll send someone to fetch Ronald's luggage in the afternoon. With that, Dumbledore and Ron left the room. Poor Ron, Andy spoke up thoughtfully. As much as he despises Draco and the other Slytherins. Well, it's his own fault and not your problem in the least, Robbie told him in a firm voice, before he excused himself and headed to his own room, because he had to study for his newts, which were going to commence in a few weeks. Hermione, would you accompany me on a walk around the lake? Andy queried pensively. I believe I should go and thank the giant squid for saving me the other day. That's true, Andy, and of course I'll accompany you, Hermione replied soothingly. The rest of the school year passed in a blur, and before Andy knew it, Robbie had taken his newts and was discussing his future plans with his aunt, who spoke with Dumbledore about the matter. The headmaster agreed to keep Robbie as professor for defense against the dark arts, knowing that he had passed his newts in that subject with top marks. What the headmaster didn't know was the fact that Robbie had already cancelled the curse, which he had placed on the defense position several decades ago, so he wouldn't be forced to resign from the position after a year. One evening, Robbie entered Andy's room, where Andy and Hermione were studying together. "I'm sorry to disturb you, but I need your help," he said hesitantly. "You're not disturbing us, big brother, sit down," Andy replied, laughing. "I assume you're planning to go to Hogsmeade together on Friday?" Robbie queried. "We didn't talk about it, but I'd think so," Andy replied, throwing Hermione a questioning glance. "Yes," she nodded, smiling at her boyfriend. "Do you think Luna would accompany me to Hogsmeade?" Robbie asked hesitantly. "I thought she was going out with Neville," Andy said thoughtfully, but was interrupted by his girlfriend. "No, Andy, Neville is going out with Susan Bones. He was together with Luna last summer, but only for a few weeks, and ever since then he has been together with Susan." "Well, Robbie, then you should just go and ask her. We can go together if that makes it easier for you," Andy told his brother. "All right, thanks," Robbie gave back and left the room in determination, heading straight to the Ravenclaw common room. "Luna, do you have a few minutes? I'd like to speak with you," Robbie addressed the girl, who was alone in the common room, crouched on the floor, looking for something under the sofa. "Of course," Luna replied, slowly standing up from the floor. "I'm just trying to find my lost things. My left shoe is missing, and they also hid a few of my books." "Oh, all right, I'll help you search," Robbie said quickly, remembering what Andy had told him about the girl. Together they searched the whole Ravenclaw house, although it took them until after curfew to gather each of Luna's lost items. "Thank you so much, Robbie," Luna finally said, giving him a dreamy look. "You're as much a gentleman as your brother. He helped me search for my things before." "Oh, I'm sorry, you wanted to speak with me about something," she suddenly remembered, looking at him questioningly. Robbie let out pensively. "Frankly speaking, I wanted to ask you if you'd accompany me to Hogsmeade on Friday. However, before I ask you that, I just remembered that I should tell you something else," he said hesitantly, remembering that Andy had told him Luna was trustworthy enough to know the truth. "You mean who you really are?" Luna queried softly, throwing him a wistful smile. "Yes, that's what I mean. Don't tell me you already know that as well," Robbie replied in a voice laced with horror. "I suppose you don't want me to know, so it's all right, and yes, I'd love to go to Hogsmeade together. Will we meet your brother for lunch? If you want us to meet with Andy and Hermione, we can do that of course," Robbie agreed, glad that he didn't have to tell the truth right now and that she promised to go to Hogsmeade with him. On their first date, Robbie led Luna into a small cafe he knew, which was so far from the main road that it wasn't frequented by the Hogwarts students. "Luna, I know that you told me you didn't care about my past, but it was so bad that I just have to tell you," he slowly began to speak when they had taken their seats, two steaming cups with hot chocolate on the table in front of them. "Could you swear me a wizard's oath that you'll keep my secret to yourself?" he asked hesitantly, causing Luna to smile and swear on her magic. "Thank you, Luna," Robbie said gratefully, trying to keep the butterflies that were dancing around in his stomach in chess. "I was Lord Voldemort, but Andy, Madame Pomfrey, as well as Professors Snape and McGonagall helped me, de-aged me, and changed me completely. Now I'm just Andy's brother and McGonagall's nephew. Probably, from the next school year onwards, I'll be the defense against the dark arts teacher." Robbie let out a deep sigh, glad that he finally managed to tell her the truth. "I'm sorry, I can understand if you want nothing to do with me anymore." "That's all right then, even if I'd appreciate if you remained my friend," he added in a small voice. Luna threw him a soft smile. "Don't fret about it, Robbie. You're worrying too much. I still like you, and I can feel that you're good now." Robbie's expression turned from anxious to hopeful at her soft talking. "Luna, I'm not sure if it is perhaps too much to ask for, but I'd like to ask you if you'd be willing to become my girlfriend." While he still blurted out his wish, a voice at the back of his mind told him, "You're stupid." Instead of giving her a bit of time to get used to the fact, who you have been in your past, you demand too much and might lose her completely. Robbie let out a deep sigh, before he hesitantly turned his eyes to the girl that seemed to be entirely lost in thoughts. "I'd love to," Luna replied simply. "However, won't it be a problem to be girlfriend and boyfriend if you're a teacher at Hogwarts next year? I'll still be a student for 2 more years." Robbie let out a long sigh. "Yes, I know that they don't like it too much, but if we make it clear from the beginning onwards, it shouldn't be a problem. We can talk to my aunt about it if you wish." As soon as they were back in the castle, they searched for McGonagall, who was sorting parchments in her office. "Hello, Ms. Lovegood, Robbie," she said gently, surprised when the two entered her office since Robbie and Andy only rarely came when she was working in order not to disturb her. "Aunt Minerva, Luna just agreed to become my girlfriend," Robbie blurted out happily, pulling Luna into a light embrace. "Congratulations, Luna, Robbie," she replied warmly, throwing the two students a fond smile. "Aunt Minerva, will it be a problem to have a relationship when I'm a teacher and Luna is still a student?" Robbie queried with concern laced in his voice. "No, Robbie, if you make it clear for everyone, so the students can't put out a rumor about it, it won't be a problem. I'll talk to the other teachers about the matter, but I'm sure that everyone will support you, especially as I'll be the headmistress from the next school year onwards. Professor Dumbledore informed me today that he wants to retire now that Voldemort is gone and that he suggested me as his successor and received full support from all sides for his decision. I only had to sign the parchment, which I did this afternoon." "Congratulations, Professor," Luna said with a big smile on her face. "I'll be sad not to have you as Transfiguration Professor anymore, but I'm glad to hear you'll be the headmistress." "That's absolutely brilliant," Robbie added. "But who is going to become your successor? I thought you already made plans to let Andy take over your position by the time you became headmistress." Minerva let out a deep sigh. "I already discussed this with Professor Snape, who will be my deputy headmaster, and we agreed to suggest to Andy to take his Transfiguration newts at the end of the summer holidays. That would enable him to teach Transfiguration, so he could at least teach a few classes during his free periods. If he agrees, I'll take over the rest of his classes." Fortunately, Professor Dumbledore agreed to remain at the castle for another year and help me with the office work. "That sounds really good," Robbie said in amazement. "Did you already speak with Andy?" "No, Robbie," Minerva sighed. "I haven't seen him yet, but I'll talk to him as soon as he returns from Hogsmeade." Andy became very excited at the thought to become a teacher so soon, and he couldn't help feeling extremely grateful towards the professor to reserve the position for him. Minerva even arranged for Hermione to become Professor Snape's assistant, knowing that the girl was very adept at potions and that Andy was already dreading not to be able to see her over the whole summer. Just like Andy, Hermione was supposed to take her newts in potions at the end of the holidays. Minerva assigned Hermione a guest room just outside her own quarters, where she could stay during the holidays. Every morning, Andy had a Transfiguration class with Minerva, while Snape taught Hermione 7th year's potions. In the afternoon, both of them studied for the newts on their own, and additionally both helped their respective teachers grade the students' final tests. Due to the fact that they always studied together and questioned each other about the content they had learned that day while they took a walk around the lake every evening, when they were through with the 7th year material by the end of July, they noticed that they could as well try to take the others' test as well. McGonagall and Snape agreed, and the two students decided that during August, they would teach each other the practical assignments every morning, while they'd study for the theoretical part of the tests in the afternoons. One day, Hermione insisted on returning to the McGonagall quarters after lunch in the Great Hall instead of heading to the library as usual. "But Hermione, we have to study," Andy protested weakly, wondering what could be wrong with his girlfriend. "Yes, I know that and we can study later on, but I'm a bit tired and want to cuddle for a while," Hermione replied, feigning a yawn. However, when they entered his aunt's quarters, Andy noticed in surprise that Robbie, Luna, Madame Pomfrey, and Professor Snape were together with his aunt, and that the whole living room was decorated beautifully. He was still looking around in confusion when Minerva stepped over to him and said, "Happy birthday, Andy. I'm sorry that we have to have such a small birthday party for your 17th birthday, but you know why. Your birth date is known all over the magical world." "Yes," Andy whispered, suddenly feeling a lump in his throat that made it impossible to say more. Andy and his guests spent the whole afternoon talking, joking, and eating the birthday cake Dobby had baked for Andy. Only when Andy tiredly lay down on his bed in the evening, he noticed that it had done good not to study one afternoon for a change. "Thank you so much, Aunt Minerva. This was my best birthday," he gratefully told Minerva when she came to say good night. "Well, a 17th birthday is special, Andy," she replied and placed a key on Andy's forehead, before she quietly left the room, noticing that his breathing already evened out. After the dates of their newts were fixed a few days later, Andy and Hermione intensified their studies even more, knowing that they had to take 2 newts on Monday and Tuesday of the last week in August. "Minerva, you have to keep Andy and Hermione off their studies for a few hours a day, otherwise Andy will get sick," Madame Pomfrey warned the new headmistress. Minerva tried her best to coax the students into taking breaks and was glad that they at least managed to regularly participate in the meals, but she couldn't always have an eye on them because of the huge amount of new duties which she had to face as headmistress. Of course, Andy thought, it was on the day before the potions newt that Madame Pomfrey's prediction became true. When he tried to force down a few pieces of his lunch in spite of having absolute no appetite, he suddenly noticed that his throat was sore and it hurt to swallow. "Oh no," he mused terrified, "do I have to get ill right in time for the newts?" Deciding that it wasn't bad enough to ask Madame Pomfrey for a potion, he headed to the library with Hermione for a last study afternoon before the newts. However, in the quiet of the empty library, his girlfriend suddenly heard that his breathing was labored and, worriedly feeling his forehead, noticed that he seemed to be getting ill. "Andy, let's go and see Madame Pomfrey. You have to take a potion for that, or you won't be able to take the test tomorrow at all. You have a chest cold that can easily turn into lung infection, which you seem to be especially prone for," Pomfrey told Andy with an extremely worried expression. "I'd say absolute bed rest for a few days, but I know that you want to take your newts tomorrow and on Tuesday." She let out a deep sigh. "I'll speak with the headmistress and ask her to try to rearrange the date for the tests. Maybe they'll be able to adjourn them to the end of the week, which would give you a bit of time to recover." She returned to her office and came back with 2 goblets filled with 1 light blue and 1 green potion, which she made Andy drink, before she told him, "You can either stay here or return to your room, but you must go to bed immediately, and I don't want to see you out of bed before your test. I'll come and check on you tonight and tomorrow morning." "Thank you, Madame Pomfrey," Andy replied sadly and returned to his room, glad that Hermione abandoned her studies as well and remained at his side over the whole afternoon and evening. "I hope they'll let us take the tests on Thursday and Friday," Andy mused, noticing that his condition worsened by the hour. However, late in the afternoon, Minerva entered the room and took a seat next to Hermione on the edge of Andy's bed. "Andy, I'm sorry," she sighed. "I spoke with the responsible persons at the ministry, and they won't be able to adjourn the tests. They can't rearrange tomorrow's date, because it's less than 24 hours before the beginning of the test, and the man, who is responsible for the transfiguration test, can only come on Tuesday, because he has to visit other schools on the other days. If you can't take your tests this time, you'll have to wait. They might let you take the test during the winter holidays considering that it's not your fault if you miss the test." "I'm sorry, sweetie." "All right," Andy mumbled, knowing that he'd try to take the tests at any cost. "All right," Andy mumbled, knowing that he'd try to take the tests at any cost. The potions exams on Monday went relatively well. Andy found the theoretical part, which took place in the morning, quite easy, and in the practical part they had to brew a healing potion that Madame Pomfrey had ordered him to brew together with Hermione and Snape for the hospital wing just a few days ago. However, when he returned to his room, he felt absolutely exhausted and ill, and Hermione noticed worriedly that McGonagall threw Pomfrey an exasperated look when she checked on Andy, clucking disapprovingly. "Will he be able to take the transfiguration exam tomorrow?" the teacher asked in concern, frowning when the Medowitch merely let out a contemplative, "We'll see." During the night, the thought, "If I don't pass the transfiguration exam, I won't be able to teach," kept Andy awake for hours, causing his fever to spike. At 5 o'clock in the morning he gave all attempts to sleep up, took a quick shower, dressed himself, and lay down on the sofa in the living room to await the beginning of the exam. Robbie was the first to get up, and when he went to check on his brother he noticed in surprise that he was already completely dressed and not in his bed anymore. "Andy, how are you feeling?" he queried, sitting down on the edge of the sofa. "Robbie, I don't feel so good," Andy croaked. "I couldn't sleep, because I'm so worried about the test." Robbie carefully laid a cold hand on Andy's forehead and gasped. "Andy, they won't let you attend the test. You're burning up." "They have to," Andy objected, panicking. "If I don't pass the test, I won't be able to teach, and Aunt Minerva would have to look for a new teacher instead of waiting for me to finish school." He threw his brother a terrified look from glassy green eyes. Robbie took a tissue out of a small package of tissues and pointed his wand at it, transfiguring it into a Muggle thermometer. "Andy, you have 104 degrees of fever," he stated, terrified, and stood up from the sofa, fetching a fever-reducing potion from the bathroom. "Here, take this, and then you can only hope that it comes down a bit, so they'll let you take the exam at all." Andy was lucky as the potion indeed worked, and Pomfrey grudgingly allowed him to get up for the test, knowing that Minerva would be assisting the Transfiguration teacher, so that she could keep an eye on the boy. Andy dragged himself through the day. Fortunately, the ministry examiner was a very kind elder man, who was very gentle after Minerva told him that Andy was sick but needed to take the exam, because he was supposed to begin teaching from the next week onwards. 2 hours into the written test, he noticed that Andy could hardly keep his head upright anymore and was shivering violently. He quietly stepped to his side. "Please show me what you have written so far and rest for a moment," he told the boy in a gentle voice, causing Andy to sigh in relief and put his aching head on the table, unaware of the concerned looks Minerva and Hermione gave him. "Mr. McGonagall, I've seen enough. You may leave, even if you haven't completely finished your test yet," the teacher said a few minutes later after thoroughly skimming what Andy had written so far. He turned to Minerva. "Professor, you may take your nephew back to bed." Throwing her colleague, whom she had known since her own graduation, a grateful look, Minerva stepped over to Andy, who raised his head in confusion. "Come Andy, let me take you back to bed, so you can rest until the practical test," she told him in a soft voice and gently led the boy home through her office. "Robbie, please call Poppy and let her check on Andy," she told her nephew, glad that he was waiting for Andy to return. The next thing Andy knew was that Minerva lightly shook his shoulder. "Andy, you have to get up. Your practical exam is going to commence in 5 minutes. Andy sat up in confusion, glancing at his wristwatch. 3 o'clock, he croaked, terrified. "My exam was at 2, wasn't it?" "Don't panic, Andy. In order to let you sleep a bit longer, we made Hermione take her test first," Minerva replied softly, before she gently helped Andy out of his bed. "Andy, are you feeling able to take the practical test at all?" "I have to," Andy whispered, leaning onto his aunt's arm as he dragged himself back into the classroom, glad that the teachers allowed him to sit down for his exam. He managed to do all his tasks flawlessly, until the teacher finally told him there was only one more task left, for which he had to stand up from his seat. "Please transfigure this monkey." The teacher took a stunned monkey from a wooden box on the floor in front of him, into a cat. Andy sighed inwardly, knowing that this was the most difficult part of the exam. Unfortunately, he couldn't muster the energy to raise his wand arm, let alone wave it to cast the spell. Instead, he instinctively glared at the monkey, silently telling it to become a cat like his aunt in her feline form. While he still felt a tingling sensation in his right arm when the magic left his body, he collapsed to the floor, unconscious and oblivious to the fact that a small tabby cat was running around the room. Outstanding like his theoretical part, the old teacher told Minerva. "Please look after your nephew. He needs you now. I can do the rest of the paperwork alone, and I'll send you the official results by all tonight." "Congratulations Minerva, you must be very proud of your nephew." When Andy woke up the next time, he found himself back in his own bed, connected to an IV as well as a monitoring device. Hermione was sitting on the edge of his bed. "Thank God you're awake, Andy. How are you feeling?" she queried, and Andy could see that an expression of concern on her face. "I'm fine," he replied, feeling much better than the last time he could remember. "Thank God," Hermione breathed, informing Andy that he had been unconscious and very ill with lung infection for a few days. Andy wasn't unconscious but fast asleep due to the strong potions I had to give him. Pomfrey, who just entered the room, alerted by an alarm that Andy had woken up, corrected her mildly. However, you still need absolute bed rest, and only if you comply, there is a small chance that you might be able to participate in the welcoming feast. Did I pass my transfiguration newt? Andy suddenly remembered to ask, causing everyone around him to laugh. Yes, sweetie, Minerva, who had arrived in the meantime together with Robbie, told him softly. You received an O in all your exams. Congratulations, Andy. I received O's in transfiguration and potions. Andy queried unbelievingly, musing, as far as I remember I didn't even finish the 2 transfiguration parts. Fortunately, Andy was lucky, and on Saturday evening, the Meadowitch grudgingly allowed him to get up for the welcoming feast. I want both of you to sit at the head table tonight, so that I can introduce you as members of the staff, Minerva told Andy and Hermione, while they slowly walked down to the Great Hall to wait for the students to arrive. From the head table, they watched how the new students were sorted, finding it amusing that Professor Snape greeted the first years and conducted the sorting ceremony. While the potions master brought the hat away, Minerva rose from her seat and addressed the students. Dear students, welcome back home and welcome to Hogwarts to our first years. I know that you're tired and hungry, but please allow me to shortly introduce our new teachers to you since some of you might wonder why certain persons are sitting at the head table. First of all, Professor Robbie McGonagall is our new teacher for Defense Against the Dark Arts, and we all hope to be able to keep him here for many years. The Great Hall was so silent that one would have heard the slightest sound, so Minerva continued gently, since Professor Dumbledore retired this summer, I have taken over his position. As you can imagine, besides being headmistress I won't be able to remain head of Gryffindor and Transfiguration Professor. Therefore, Andy McGonagall will take over both positions. Together with Ms. Granger, he took his newts in Transfiguration and Potions this summer and will teach all the Transfiguration classes except for a few, which I am going to take over while Andy has his classes in Charms, Herbology, and Healing, because he still wants to take his newts in these subjects at the end of the school year. Minerva glanced to the side, where the deputy headmaster just returned to his seat. Ms. Granger is Professor Snape's assistant and will partly take over his classes, while she finishes her newt classes in some subjects. Please pay all these new professors the same respect as the others, even if 2 of them are still studying here for their newts in a few subjects. Why can Andy be the Gryffindor head of house in spite of being in Ravenclaw? Ronald Weasley shouted into the hall from the Slytherin table, causing Hermione to let out a loud sigh. If he tries that again, his magic will be gone. Ron's really stupid, she whispered to Harry, who sat next to her in complete shock. Probably because he isn't so stupid to let himself be sorted into a house, where he absolutely doesn't belong like you, Weasley, Draco sneered for everyone to hear, causing the Slytherins to snicker. Quiet. All of a sudden the deputy headmaster's voice sounded through the Great Hall, admonishing the students, although Andy was sure that the edges of Severus and his aunt's mouth pulled slightly upwards at Draco's comment. As far as the sorting hat told the headmistress and me, he wanted to place Mr. McGonagall into Gryffindor. However, probably because his brother had already been sorted into Ravenclaw, he coaxed the hat into placing him in Ravenclaw as well. Therefore, Mr. McGonagall is more than competent to become Professor McGonagall's successor as Gryffindor head of house. Since this is my and the other teachers' decision, I'd like to ask anyone who has problems with this decision to come to me and discuss the matter with me. With that, Professor Snape sat down, receiving grateful looks from Andy and the headmistress, who ended her speech as well, so dinner appeared on the table. After dinner, Andy entered the Gryffindor common room, assembling all the students, to introduce himself, especially to the first years, who didn't know him yet. Welcome to Gryffindor, first years, welcome back home to the older students, he addressed his students. As Professor McGonagall told you, from now on I will be your head of house. He looked around the students, knowing that all students from the 3rd year onwards had been his housemates before he had come to Hogwarts as Andy, and continued, here within Gryffindor, you may call me Andy. I know that Professor McGonagall never did this, but I will try to come to the common room every night around curfew and spend some time here, so you can speak with me or ask me if you have questions, personal or concerning your classes. That's a great idea, Andy, Ginny said warmly. I often wished Professor McGonagall had offered that. My girlfriend said so too, Andy agreed. I'm planning to establish a new system in this house, according to which the older house members helped the younger ones, while the younger ones assisted the 5th and 7th year students by doing little chores for them. Therefore, I expect the upper classes to help the first years to get used to the life in Gryffindor, and I would like to ask the 6th year prefects to take turns taking the first years to their classes on Monday morning. I will excuse you with your teachers accordingly. If you don't have pressing questions tonight, I'd suggest that you head to bed. All right, Andy, the 6th year prefects replied immediately, causing Andy to give them a relieved smile. Thank you. All right then. Good night everyone. With that, he left the common room and returned to his own room, glad to be able to go back to bed. Andy quickly became used to being head of Gryffindor. Due to the fact that he knew the house better than the students could assume, had even known most of the students for years, and was the same age as the 7th years, he thoroughly enjoyed his time in the common room every evening, especially as there weren't as many huge problems like there had been during most of his own Hogwarts years. However, Andy was extremely busy preparing his classes, attending staff meetings as well as head of house meetings, and doing his homework for the 3 classes he still attended. He was often called when his students got into fights with students from other houses, although Madame Pomfrey resolved to only call him in very bad cases, knowing that Andy had more work to do than his health condition allowed. Fortunately, Hermione and Robbie kept a close eye on Andy since Minerva was very busy getting used to her new position, and whenever Andy showed signs of getting sick, his girlfriend and his brother called Madame Pomfrey to check on him and informed Minerva, who took over his classes. Whenever Andy was ill, Hermione spent some time in the common room in his place. Severus is recently doing a lot of research in order to develop something that helps with your heart problem as well as something for the pain in your scar that arises whenever you're together with Robbie, Andy, Hermione told him one day when she spent the whole Sunday sitting on the edge of Andy's bed, looking after her boyfriend, who was ill with a high fever. I hope he'll be able to find something soon, Harry groaned. I feel so bad when Minerva has to teach my classes. You don't have to feel bad, Andy. She knew about your condition before she decided to make you her successor, Hermione replied gently. Andy sighed. I hope I'll be all right next weekend. I have to supervise the Hogsmeade visit on Saturday. If you can't go, I'll take over, but it would be great if we could go together, Andy. We haven't been on a date for a long time, Hermione said eagerly. Well, if you think that the Hogsmeade visit on the day before the students go home for Christmas would be a good opportunity for a date, we'll try. We can ask Robbie if he and Luna want to join us, Andy smirked, knowing from chaperoning an earlier Hogsmeade visit that the teachers were quite busy on these occasions. However, unexpected happenings forced them to postpone their Hogsmeade date to another time. In spite of not being completely recovered from his recent illness, Andy taught all of his classes, knowing that it was the last week before the holidays, which would give him time enough to rest. One day, Andy let the 7th year Gryffindors and Slytherins transfigure toads into cats. The transfiguration was fairly difficult, but it was already the second time that Andy let his students practice, and nearly half of the students already managed the transfiguration. Don't forget to stun your toads before you transfigure them, Andy reminded the students at the beginning of the class and sat down at his desk watching the students practice. Suddenly, he noticed that Draco was running through the classroom after a cat. Sighing in exasperation, Andy cast a stunning spell at the cat and awarded Draco 5 points for the transfiguration. Well done, Mr. Malfoy, he commended his former rival, causing the boy to throw him a slightly apologetic look. No, Professor, I'm sorry, but that's Weasley. I accidentally hit him with the spell, he announced. Andy looked at the spot in front of Draco's seat, where Ron had been sitting before, rolling his eyes in exasperation as he took in the stunned toad on Draco's desk, before he pointed his wand at the cat and transfigured it back into Ronald Weasley. Are you all right, Mr. Weasley? He queried, giving his former friend a sharp look. However, Ron preferred not to answer and instead stepped over to Draco, forcefully punching him into the nose, causing his housemate to hold on to his bleeding nose with a terrified expression on his face. Andy sighed. 20 points from Slytherin, Mr. Weasley, and detention tonight after dinner here in the classroom. Your head of house and your mother will be informed of this, he announced, before he quickly cast a diagnostic spell on Draco and turned to Blaise. Mr. Zabini, please accompany Mr. Malfoy and Mr. Weasley to Madame Pomfrey and tell her what happened. I suspect that Mr. Malfoy's nose is broken. Fortunately, the rest of the class passed uneventfully. Blaise returned shortly before the end of class and informed Andy that Ron had already been dismissed and that Draco's nose had been broken but was already healed and that he had to stay for an hour for supervision. Andy spent the hour until dinner pondering what he should let Ron do for his detention and finally decided to let him write a sentence. He took an empty parchment and a quill and wrote, "I may not hurt other students in class, especially not my own housemates." Heading back into their quarters, he searched Robbie, who was grading homework in his office. "Hey Robbie," Andy said, glad to see his brother in spite of the fact that his headache worsened immensely as he came close to him. "Can you do me a favor please?" "Of course, Andy, what's wrong?" Robbie inquired gently, giving his brother a piercing look. "Andy, you don't look good. You should go to bed and call it a day." Andy sighed. "I know, but I don't have time." He quickly told him what had happened in the last Transfiguration class. "Robbie, will you be here tonight after dinner? If so, could you perhaps be in the living room or in my office, so that you can hear me in case I need you? I don't know, it probably sounds stupid, but somehow I don't trust Ron anymore, especially as he doesn't seem to accept my authority at all." "Of course, Andy, I'll be in your office," Robbie promised, before he pulled Andy with him to the Great Hall, where Andy sat next to Severus and filled him in about what happened. "I'm not sure if Draco did it intentionally or not, so I decided not to blame him. I took 20 points from Slytherin and gave Ron detention tonight with me," Andy told his colleague, causing Robbie to inform the Slytherin head of house about Andy's worries concerning Ron. "He should know better than to harm you, Andy," Severus said, quirking an eyebrow. "He swore on his magic not to harm you, so that if he does, he'll lose his magic. I know that he is a dunderhead, but I don't think he's stupid enough to risk everything he possesses." "That's true," Andy agreed, inwardly sighing in relief. While he continued to play with his food, he watched as the deputy headmaster stepped over to the Slytherin table and exchanged a few words with Draco, before he turned to Ron and spoke to him with a very upset expression on his face. "Shall we go back, Andy?" Robbie pulled him out of his reverie, and together with Hermione the two brothers walked back to their quarters. Andy spent a few minutes cuddling with Hermione, before he heard that Ron arrived at his classroom door and stepped into the classroom, calling the 7th year in. "Ron," he addressed his former friend, "please write this sentence 50 times without using magic." He held the parchment out for Ron to take. However, the Slytherin stepped over to Andy in a blind fury. Andy watched as Ron slowly came nearer, his former friend's face taking on an angry red color as he suddenly raised his fist. "You don't think I'm going to write these stupid sentences, do you? Remember, I know who you are." With that, Ron's fist connected to Andy's face in a fast and forceful movement, causing the young teacher to stumble backwards and hit the ground. "Hurts," Andy thought as his head exploded in pain, while he waited for the colorful stars in front of his eyes to vanish. Before he could properly grasp what had happened, let alone show any reaction, Hermione was at his side, looking at him in concern. At the same time, Robbie was taking care of Ron, who tried to storm out of the classroom. Robbie stunned the Slytherin, before he mumbled a long incantation, pointing his wand at the boy all the time. "Was that a dark spell?" Hermione queried in suspicion, noticing a very content expression on her colleague's face. "You better call Minerva and Severus to deal with him, and please call Poppy too. I don't think Andy is all right." "I'll call her first. That scum over there can wait," Robbie replied with an angry glance at Ron and returned to Andy's office. A few minutes later, Minerva, Poppy, and Severus were gathered in the Transfiguration classroom, listening to Hermione's explanations, while the healer ran a few diagnostic spells on Andy. "Andy, you have a concussion in addition to your former ailment. I'm going to take you with me to the hospital wing," Poppy said softly, causing Andy to panic as realization about what had happened set in. No, please don't. He could come and do something to me, if I was in the hospital wing, he breathed, closing his eyes in pain. No, Andy. Mr. Weasley won't be at Hogwarts much longer to hurt you again. Severus' silky voice penetrated Andy's mind. As his head of house, I'm going to expel him tonight. Now, Mr. Weasley, his voice hardened, try to cast the Expelliarmus spell at me, he ordered his student, undoing the stunning spell as he spoke. Ron raised his wand, mumbling a spell Andy recognized as a cutting spell, but no magic hit against the professor's quickly set up protection charm. What do you believe you're doing, Weasley? Casting a cutting charm against your head of house? Robbie hissed furiously. Well, congratulations, you're a squib now, and in contrary to all the other squibs running around, it's your own fault. Severus, Robbie, are you sure Mr. Weasley's magic is gone? Minerva queried sternly, while Poppy and Hermione left the classroom and headed into Andy's office with Andy on a stretcher floating ahead. Weasley, try to cast a Lumos spell, and let me warn you, I know enough spells to make your life miserable, Severus instructed the boy. Ron tried to cast a harmless spell to no avail. I can't, he blurted out, panicking. Mr. Weasley, you swore a wizard's oath on your magic to Andy that you wouldn't harm him, and since you broke your oath it affected your magic, Minerva explained in a stern voice. We will ask Madame Pomfrey to check on you when she is finished with Andy. Please follow me into my office, I'm going to call your mother over as well. Severus, Robbie, would you please join us? Of course, Minerva. Severus and Robbie agreed and followed the headmistress and the youngest Weasley boy through the corridors to the headmistress' office, incessantly pointing their wands at Ron, who was gripping his head in agony. On their way, Robbie threw a silencing spell around Severus and himself, so he could tell his colleague about the spell he cast on the boy earlier, causing the edges of Severus' mouth to slightly move upwards. Madame Pomfrey and Hermione took Andy into his own room, gently placing him on his bed. Andy, I'll allow you to remain here, seeing that the holidays are going to begin the day after tomorrow, which means that everyone has time to stay with you and keep you in bed, Poppy said firmly. However, if I catch you with as much as a foot out of your bed, you're going to be in trouble and you'll find yourself in the hospital wing very quickly, young man. Okay, Andy replied tiredly, closing his achy eyes. No, Andy, you mustn't sleep yet. I have to fetch a potion for you, and only when it takes effect you may sleep, Poppy instructed him in a much softer voice, causing Andy to let out a small moan. It's all right, sweetie, Poppy will be back in the blink of an eye, Hermione reassured her boyfriend in a soft voice, gently stroking his flushed cheeks until Poppy returned with the potion and allowed Andy to drift off to sleep. At the same time, Minerva, Severus, and Robbie explained the evening's events to a shocked Mrs. Weasley. I'm so sorry, Molly, Minerva finished her explanation, feeling very sorry for the mother of 7 children. No, Minerva, I am sorry for my son's behavior, Molly replied stoically before she turned to Ron. Ronald, how could you risk your magic for your jealousy towards Andy instead of being glad that the poor boy is happy at last? I'm very disappointed. Don't worry, Mum, I wanted to leave Hogwarts anyway. Life in Slytherin with a Death Eater as head of house and lots of mini Death Eaters running around is unbearable. I'm sure the twins will give me some work to do in their shop, Ron replied stubbornly. As far as I know Andy owns the shop together with the twins, Robbie threw in, smirking. Hermione told me that he gave them the money to start their shop in the first place. Fortunately, Andy is very forgiving, but we'll see. Now get into the flow and go home, Ronald. I'll follow in a few minutes, Molly said firmly, watching as Ron stepped into the fireplace before she turned back to Minerva. Does Ginny know about Harry? No, Ginevra only knows Andy as her head of house, Minerva replied, sighing. Only very few of the teachers know as well as you and Ronald. Andy wished it to remain that way. He only wanted to tell you and Ronald because you were always very close to him. Would you like me to call Ginevra, so you explain about Ronald's expulsion? I'm sure it will be quite a shock for her. Yes, please. I won't say anything about Harry, Molly promised. Robbie stepped over to the fireplace, calling Hermione in his own living room. Hermione, he said, when his brother's girlfriend's head finally appeared in the flames. Is Andy all right? He's asleep right now, Hermione replied sadly. I'm sorry to disturb you, but could you please go to the Gryffindor common room and send Ginny Weasley down to the headmistress' office? Her mother wants to explain everything to her personally. Of course, I'll accompany Ginny, Hermione voiced her understanding before she cut off the connection. 20 minutes later, Mrs. Weasley informed her daughter about the fact that her youngest son was a squib and expelled from Hogwarts because of attacking his teachers. I can't understand, Ginny blurted out bewildered. Why would he attack Professors McGonagall and Snape just because he had to write a few lines? He has always been jealous of Andy ever since he got to know that he is my boyfriend, Hermione said softly, still calmingly holding her arm around Ginny's back. After he attacked Andy the first time, he had to swear a wizard's oath on his magic he wouldn't attack him again, and because of breaking his oath he ended up as a squib, Molly explained, noticing that her daughter still seemed confused. Ginevra, would you like to go home with your mother tonight? I can excuse you for the last 2 days of classes, Minerva offered in a gentle voice, causing the girl to shake her head. No thank you, Professor. I don't want to see my brother right now, and I'd like to apologize to Professor McGonagall for what Ron did to him before going home for Christmas, Ginny replied firmly. Mrs. Weasley pulled her daughter into a bear hug, before she excused herself and stepped into the fireplace. Ginny, I'm not sure if you'll be able to speak with Andy before the holidays, Hermione said softly as she accompanied her friend back to Gryffindor. He is very ill. I'll tell him that you want to speak with him though, and if Madame Pomfrey allows it, I'll take you to him. Thank you, Hermione, Ginny replied in a small voice. Please tell Andy that I'm sorry for what Ron did. Ginny, none of that is your fault, and Andy knows that, Hermione said firmly, before she gave the fat lady the password and watched as the girl slowly returned to her common room. Only a few weeks later, the news that Ron Weasley was missing and that an amount of 2,000 galleons had vanished from the Weasley twins' shop traveled to Hogwarts. Hermione, may I speak with you for a moment? Ginny stepped to the teacher's desk after her potions class, which Hermione had held instead of Severus, who was busily brewing something urgent. Of course, Hermione replied gently, leading the girl into the office she shared with Severus. I received this from the twins this morning, Ginny began hesitantly, pulling a parchment out of her robe pocket. They told me Ron probably left to hide in the Muggle world and get his revenge on Harry. They don't know what it is about, but according to them Ron threatened to kill Harry several times, and when they asked if he knew where Harry was he said, yes. I see, Hermione said pensively. All right, thank you, Ginny, for alerting me to the problem. I will contact Harry and tell him about it. Do you know where Harry is? Ginny queried, and her face took on a slightly upset expression. Yes, I know, but I'm not allowed to tell anyone, Hermione replied firmly and stood up from her seat. It was a few days after Hermione and Andy took their remaining newts that Ronald Weasley decided to attack his former best friend. Hermione and Andy were taking a walk around the lake, enjoying the beautiful sunshine, and Andy chose the first day after the students had returned home for the summer to propose to his girlfriend. He handed her a small package, wrapped in dark blue wrapping paper. Hermione, you've been my girlfriend for so long, and we've finally finished our remaining newts. Oh no, I'm rambling, he thought as he continued, anyway, I'd like you to marry me and become my wife. Hermione looked at her boyfriend with a huge smile on her face as she replied positively and carefully opened the package, revealing a golden ring with a Celtic design of a griffin. Oh Andy, this is absolutely beautiful, she gasped and pulled him into a long key asterisk, unaware of the fact that Robbie and Luna were sitting nearby, cuddling under the invisibility cloak, since Robbie was trying to take care of his younger brother as usual. Only a year and I'll be able to propose to Luna as well, Robbie mused as he gently stroked the soft curves of her body. All of a sudden, the sound of a gunshot broke the romantic scene, and Andy was hit straight in the head. While his brother collapsed, unconscious, Robbie turned around, pulling his wand at the same time. Over there, Luna shouted, causing Robbie to cast a stunning spell along with a binding spell, followed by a dark spell in a swift sequence. That should do. Nevertheless, stay here and watch him, Luna. Hermione, go and inform the headmistress that she has to call the orders to give Weasley a ride to Azkaban. I'll take Andy to the hospital wing. Robbie hurriedly blurted out instructions, before he scooped Andy up and rushed into the castle, nodding gratefully at Hermione, when she held the doors open for him. An hour later, Ronald Weasley was brought into a ministry cell in order to have a trial on the following day, before he received his one-way ticket to the wizarding prison. At the same time, Andy was stuck in the hospital wing, unconscious and struggling for his life. He remained in a coma over the whole summer, and it was only a few days before the beginning of the new school year that he finally woke up. What happened? He asked in confusion, noticing in surprise that he was in a bed in the otherwise empty hospital wing with Hermione, Luna and Robbie sitting next to his bed. No, go away everyone, it's my turn first, Poppy said firmly, pushing everyone aside as she rushed to Andy's side for a thorough checkup. Ronald shot you right after Hermione agreed to become your wife, Luna informed him in a soft voice, causing Andy to glance around frightened. Don't worry, he is in Azkaban, Hermione hurried to reassure her fiancé, before everyone turned around as the doors opened and were slammed closed immediately afterwards. Andy looked up, seeing the potion's master stride over to his bed. I used the time you chose to sleep and keep everyone on their toes with worry to brew a few potions for you, Severus sneered, before he made Andy swallow several nasty liquids. When Andy was released from Poppy's clutches an hour later, Hermione accompanied him to the headmistress' office, knowing that Minerva was as worried as everyone else but couldn't easily abandon her office to remain at his side in the hospital wing. Minerva gave Andy a sharp look, before she pulled him in a bear hug. I was so worried, but you're looking significantly better, sweetie. Are you feeling all right? Minerva, I feel wonderful. Severus managed to develop an ointment for me. If I apply that to my scar once a week, it won't hurt anymore, even if I'm together with Robbie. I think today is the first time in years that I don't have a headache. Oh, Andy, that's indeed good news. I'm very happy for you, the headmistress replied, smiling. Now, you still have a few days to thoroughly enjoy your engagement. I don't want you to do any work but to have fun during the remaining days of the holidays, both of you. Thank you, Minerva, Andy and Hermione replied simultaneously, exchanging a loving look. All of a sudden, in the portrait right behind Minerva's desk, Dumbledore cleared his throat. Excuse me if I'm interrupting your conversation, but is my assumption correct that you're Harry Potter, and Robbie is Tom Riddle? Yes, Professor, congratulations for finding out the truth after so many years, Andy replied with a huge smile playing on his lips as he pulled Hermione into a long key asterisk, while the headmistress watched the scene in amusement. To be continued. I hope you enjoyed this story. Also remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.